The roar of the crowd hit Zane like a physical blow as the energy gate hissed open. He stumbled forward, blinking against the sudden glare of the Colosseum's artificial suns. The air smelled of ozone, blood, and something metallic he couldn't identify. Beneath his bare feet, the arena floor wasn't sand but some dark, granular substance that clung to his skin like wet ash. It was warm, heated from below, he realized, and left faint crimson stains where he walked. He wore only tattered gray cloth around his waist, the standard slave uniform of the Starfall Colosseum. No armor. No weapon. Just his human body, already marked with fresh welts from the guards' shock prods that had hurted him here. Across the circular arena, another gate opened. What emerged wasn't just an alien. It was a nightmare-given form. The Skarax Beetle stood nearly 8 feet tall at its hunched shoulders, its body a mass of overlapping chitin plates the color of dried blood. 6 segmented legs, each ending in barbed hooks, skittered across the blood sand with unsettling speed. But it was the head that froze Zane's breath in his throat, a triangular wedge dominated by twin mandibles that clicked together with a sound like breaking bones. Each mandible was serrated, longer than Zane's forearm, and glistened with some oily secretion. The crowd's roar intensified. Thousands of voices from dozens of species blended into a single wall of sound. Zane couldn't see individual faces in the tiered seating that rose toward the Colosseum's domed ceiling, just a blur of motion and color. But he could feel their hunger. They hadn't come to watch a fight. They'd come to watch him die. First match, a booming voice announced through hidden speakers. The words echoed in a language Zane somehow understood, though the accent was guttural, alien. Human slave versus Skarax Beetle. Let the entertainment begin. The beetle charged. Zane's training, what little he'd received in the slave pens, flooded back. He dove to the right as the mandibles snapped shut where his chest had been. The air displacement ruffled his hair. He hit the ground hard, the impact driving the breath from his lungs. The blood sand scraped his skin raw. He scrambled to his feet, already backing away. His heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. The arena walls were smooth, polished obsidian that rose 30 feet to the first row of spectators. No handholds. No cover. The beetle turned with unnerving grace for something so massive. Its compound eyes, facets of gleaming black, tracked him without emotion. It advanced again, more deliberately this time, mandibles opening and closing in a rhythmic threat display. Zane circled, keeping distance. Sweat stung his eyes. He'd been starving for days, the masters fed slaves just enough to keep them functional, and already his muscles trembled with exhaustion. How long could he dodge? How many times could he avoid those mandibles before his luck ran out? The beetle feinted left, then lunged right. Zane reacted too slowly. A mandible grazed his side, tearing through skin and muscle. He cried out, stumbling backward as hot blood soaked his tattered cloth. The pain was immediate and intense, a white-hot line of fire across his ribs. The crowd cheered at the first blood. Zane pressed a hand to the wound. His fingers came away slick and red. He could feel the edges of the gash, could feel the steady pulse of blood escaping his body. This wasn't a superficial cut. This was deep. Mortal, if left untreated. And there would be no treatment. The beetle seemed to sense his weakness. It advanced more confidently now, mandibles clicking in anticipation. Zane backed toward the arena wall, his bare feet slipping in the blood sand. His mind raced through possibilities, discarding each as impossible. No weapons. No escape. No mercy. He remembered the other slaves whispering in the pens. The ones who'd been here longer. They said the masters liked to match humans against creatures that would make their deaths entertaining. Prolonged. The Skarax Beetle didn't kill quickly. It dismembered. It fed while its prey still screamed. Zane's back hit the wall. Cold, polished obsidian pressed against his wounded side. The beetle closed the final distance, mandibles spreading wide enough to envelop his entire torso. This was it. He would die here, in this alien arena, for the amusement of creatures who saw him as less than an insect. The injustice of it burned hotter than his wound. He'd been taken from Earth, snatched from a transport shuttle by slavers who didn't even bother explaining why. Just another human to throw into the meat grinder of the Starfall Colosseum. No. The thought came not as words but as pure, animal rage. He wouldn't die like this. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction. As the mandibles descended, Zane didn't try to dodge. Instead, he lunged forward, directly into the beetle's attack. The move was so unexpected that the beetle hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for Zane to slip beneath the mandibles. He threw himself against the creature's thorax, his hands scrabbling for purchase on the slick chitin. The beetle reared back, trying to shake him off, but Zane clung on, driven by desperation and a hunger that went deeper than starvation. His fingers found a seam between plates. He dug in, ignoring the pain as his nails tore. He pulled, putting all his weight into it. The chitin resisted, then gave with a wet, tearing sound. Beneath was not flesh but some fibrous tissue, pulsing with a faint bioluminescent glow. The beetle shrieked, a high-pitched sound that cut through the crowd's roar. It thrashed wildly, trying to dislodge him, but Zane held on. He reached into the opening he'd created, his hands sinking into warm, viscous fluid. His fingers closed around something solid, something that beat with a rhythmic throb. The heart. He pulled. The organ came free with a sound like Velcro tearing. It was larger than his fist, roughly spherical, and still connected by thick cords of tissue that stretched and snapped. The beetle's thrashing became convulsions. Its legs buckled. It collapsed to the blood sand, mandibles clicking weakly. Zane stood over the dying creature, the alien heart dripping in his hand. The crowd had fallen silent. He could feel thousands of eyes on him, watching this unexpected reversal. He was starving. Not just for food, but for something more. For survival. For revenge. He brought the heart to his mouth and bit. The taste was indescribable, metallic and bitter, with an undertone of something sweetly rotten. The texture was like chewing rubber filled with grit. He gagged, nearly vomiting, but forced himself to swallow. Then another bite. And another. He ate ravenously, tearing chunks of the fibrous tissue with his teeth, not caring about the blood that coated his face and chest. As the last piece slid down his throat, the pain began. It started in his stomach, a burning sensation that spread rapidly through his entire body. Zane dropped to his knees, clutching his abdomen. His muscles seized. His bones felt like they were cracking, reforming. He tried to scream, but no sound emerged. His vision blurred, then sharpened with unnatural clarity. He could see individual grains of blood sand, could see the microscopic scratches on the beetle's chitin, could see the horrified expressions on the faces in the front rows. The transformation was excruciating. Something erupted from his skin. Not all at once, but in patches that spread like a disease. Hard plates pushed through his flesh, tearing through skin and muscle. They were the same color as the Skarax Beetle's carapace, dried blood red, and they grew in overlapping segments across his back, shoulders, and chest. The process was audible, a series of wet pops and cracks that echoed in the silent arena. Zane arched his back, his body convulsing uncontrollably. He could feel the chitin bonding to his skeleton, could feel it becoming part of him. The pain reached a crescendo, a white-hot agony that consumed every thought, every memory, every shred of his humanity. For a moment, he was nothing but pain. Then it began to recede. The beetle, in its death throes, made one final effort. A mandible lashed out, aiming for Zane's exposed throat. It struck the newly formed chitin on his shoulder. The sound was like stone hitting stone. The mandible didn't pierce. Didn't even scratch. It glanced off, leaving Zane unharmed. The beetle collapsed for the last time, its bioluminescent glow fading to darkness. Silence. Complete, utter silence in an arena built for noise. Zane pushed himself to his feet. His movements were different now, stiffer, heavier. The chitin plates shifted with him, not like armor he wore but like part of his body. He looked down at his hands. They were still human, but patches of red chitin crept up his forearms like some grotesque jewelry. He turned toward the crowd. Thousands of alien faces stared back, expressions ranging from horror to fascination to disgust. No one cheered. No one moved. They had come to see a human die, and instead they had witnessed this. A gate hissed open. Not the one he'd entered through, but a smaller service entrance. Guards emerged, hulking brutes in polished armor, their faces hidden behind featureless helmets. They carried shock prods that crackled with blue energy. Zane didn't resist as they approached. He was too exhausted, too overwhelmed by what had just happened. They grabbed him roughly, their grip tight on his arms. The shock prods didn't touch him, the guards seemed hesitant to make contact with his new chitin. As they dragged him from the arena, Zane caught a glimpse of his reflection in the polished obsidian wall. A human face stared back, pale and streaked with blood and alien viscera. But from the neck down, he was something else. Something monstrous. The chitin plates covered his torso completely, merging seamlessly at his shoulders and spine. They gleamed dully in the arena's artificial light, the color of old wounds. The face in the reflection was his. The eyes were his. But the thing they were attached to. The guards pulled him through the gate, and the reflection vanished into darkness. Zane's consciousness returned in fragments, each piece sharp as broken glass. First came the sterile smell, chemicals and ozone that burned his nostrils. Then the cold, a metallic chill that seeped through the thin medical gown someone had draped over him. Finally, the pain, not the sharp agony of the beetle's mandibles tearing through his flesh, but a deep, persistent ache that seemed to originate from his bones and radiate outward. He opened his eyes to a ceiling of smooth white panels, glowing with soft, artificial light. When he tried to sit up, his body resisted. Something heavy and unyielding pressed against his back and shoulders. Memory flooded back, the beetle's heart, hot and bitter in his mouth, the eruption of chitin from his skin. He craned his neck, trying to see. The chitinous plates were still there. They hadn't been a nightmare. They covered his upper back, shoulders, and chest in overlapping segments of dark, iridescent green, like the carapace of some enormous insect. When he flexed his muscles, the plates shifted slightly, scraping against each other with a sound like stone on stone. They were fused to his skin, not armor he could remove, but part of him now. A door hissed open to his left. Zane froze, keeping his eyes closed, listening. Footsteps approached, 2 sets, one heavy and deliberate, the other lighter, almost skittering. Subject 7 to 42, a voice said, deep and bored. Vital signs stable. Mutation appears stable as well. Zane risked cracking one eyelid. 2 figures stood over him. The first was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing the gray uniform of an arena master, his face hidden behind a featureless silver helmet. The second was smaller, clad in a white medical robe, with 4 slender arms that ended in delicate, multi-jointed fingers. An alien medic, Zane guessed, though he'd never seen one up close before. The medic's upper pair of hands held a scanner that emitted a soft blue light. The lower hands tapped at a floating data slate. Fascinating, the medic said, its voice a high-pitched warble. The chitin integration is at 98%. No rejection symptoms. The subject's biology is adaptable. The arena master grunted. Adaptable or not, he's a freak. The crowd didn't know whether to cheer or vomit. Precisely why he's valuable, the medic replied. The masters want to see how far this can go. What other traits can he assimilate? How much can his body change before it breaks? Zane's heart hammered against his ribs. They were talking about him like he was a specimen in a jar. He forced himself to breathe slowly, to keep his muscles relaxed. The arena master leaned closer. Zane could see his own reflection in the helmet's polished surface, a pale human face attached to a monstrous, insectoid torso. If you ask me, we should dissect him now. See what makes him tick. Before he becomes a problem. Dissection would destroy the specimen, the medic said sharply. And the masters have already scheduled his next match. Against a gelid slime. They want to test the chitin's resistance to corrosive agents. A slime? The arena master sounded amused. That'll be quick. The acid will eat through that fancy shell in minutes. Perhaps. Or perhaps he'll surprise us again. The 2 figures moved away, their conversation fading as they exited the room. The door hissed shut. Zane lay still for another minute, then slowly sat up. The med bay was small and sterile, with no windows. A single monitoring screen flickered in the corner, displaying his vitals. He swung his legs over the edge of the medical slab, his bare feet touching the cold floor. He stood, testing his balance. The chitin added weight, but it was distributed evenly. When he moved his arms, the plates on his shoulders shifted with a smooth, organic motion. He walked to a reflective panel on the wall, not quite a mirror, but polished enough to show his silhouette. The sight made his stomach clench. From the neck down, he looked like something that had crawled out of a nightmare. The chitin covered his torso in a natural armor, segmented and glossy. It tapered at his waist, leaving his abdomen and legs human, for now. His skin where it met the chitin was red and inflamed, but the fusion was seamless, as if the plates had grown from within. He raised a hand, touching the chitin on his chest. It was hard as ceramic, but warm to the touch, pulsing with his heartbeat. This was him now. Not just Zane the slave, but Zane the monster. The door hissed open again. 2 guards entered, hulking brutes in heavy armor, their faces hidden behind helmets. They didn't speak, just gestured for him to follow. Zane considered resisting, but what was the point? He was unarmed, trapped in a Colosseum designed to break beings like him. He followed. They led him through sterile corridors, then down into the bowels of the arena. The air grew damp and cold, smelling of mildew and blood. They passed other cells, some empty, some holding creatures that snarled or hissed as they walked by. Finally, they stopped before a heavy metal door. One guard tapped a code into a panel, and the door slid open, revealing a familiar sight, the Gladiator's preparation chamber. It was a small, stone-walled room with a bench and a bucket of water. No weapons. No armor, not that he needed any now. The guards shoved him inside, and the door slammed shut, locking with a heavy clang. Zane sat on the bench, listening to the distant roar of the crowd. They were cheering for blood again. His blood, or the monster's? He didn't know. He flexed his shoulders, feeling the chitin plates shift. Would it be enough? The medic had said they were pitting him against a gelid slime, something corrosive. Acid. He remembered the beetle's final strike, how the chitin had deflected it. But acid was different. Acid didn't strike, it consumed. A grating sound echoed through the chamber as a section of the far wall slid upward, revealing the arena beyond. Sunlight, real or artificial, Zane couldn't tell, flooded in, blinding him for a moment. The crowd's roar swelled, a wave of noise that vibrated through the stone floor. Zane stood, squinting into the light. The arena was vast, its sandy floor stained dark in patches. Tiered seats rose on all sides, packed with aliens of every shape and size. Above, holographic displays flickered, showing close-ups of the combatants. One display showed Zane's face, pale and determined. The other showed something else. It oozed into the arena from the opposite gate, a gelatinous mass the color of spoiled milk, roughly the size of a ground vehicle. It had no distinct shape, just a quivering blob that left a sizzling trail in the sand. As it moved, pseudopods extended from its body, tentacle-like appendages that dripped with clear, viscous fluid. Where the fluid landed, the sand smoked and melted. The gelid slime. Zane's mouth went dry. The crowd's cheers turned to excited murmurs. They'd seen the chitin on the displays. They were waiting to see if it would hold. Zane stepped out into the arena, the sand hot under his feet. The slime paused, as if sensing him. Then it surged forward, faster than he'd expected, its body flowing over the sand like water. Zane backed away, keeping distance. The slime extended a tentacle, lashing out. Zane dodged, but the tip grazed his arm. Pain exploded, not a cut, but a burning, melting sensation. He looked down. The chitin where the tentacle had touched was smoking, the surface bubbling and dissolving. The acid was eating through it. Panic clawed at his throat. He'd been right. The chitin wasn't enough. The slime lashed out again, another tentacle whipping toward his chest. Zane threw himself sideways, rolling in the sand. The tentacle missed, splashing acid that ate a hole in the ground where he'd been standing. He scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding. Think. He had to think. The beetle's heart had given him chitin. What if he could take something from this thing too? The slime oozed closer, its body quivering. It extended 2 tentacles this time, aiming for his legs. Zane jumped back, but one tentacle wrapped around his ankle. Acid seared through his skin, the unprotected skin below the chitin. He screamed, tearing his leg free. The flesh was red and blistered, already weeping fluid. He was going to die here, melted into a puddle of flesh and bone. No. The memory of the beetle's heart, hot and bitter, flashed in his mind. The desperation. The survival. He looked at the slime, at its dripping tentacles. If he could get one. The slime surged again, its main body flowing toward him. Zane didn't retreat this time. He ran forward, straight at it. The crowd roared in confusion. At the last second, he dropped into a slide, passing beneath a sweeping tentacle. As he slid, he reached up, grabbing the tentacle with both hands. The acid burned his palms immediately, the pain so intense his vision whited out. But he held on, twisting, pulling. The tentacle tore free from the slime's body with a sound like wet rope snapping. Clear fluid gushed from the wound, sizzling on the sand. Zane scrambled back, clutching the severed tentacle. It writhed in his hands, still dripping acid. His palms were raw, the skin peeling away. He didn't have time to hesitate. He brought the tentacle to his mouth and bit down. The taste was indescribable, bitter, chemical, like drinking battery acid. He gagged, but forced himself to swallow. The flesh was gelatinous, dissolving on his tongue. He ate more, tearing chunks with his teeth, swallowing before he could vomit. Nothing happened at first. Then the nausea hit, a wave of sickness so violent he doubled over, retching. But nothing came up. Instead, a new pain blossomed in his back, different from the acid burns. It was a deep, internal ache, as if something were growing inside him, pushing against his spine. He fell to his knees, clutching his stomach. The slime, wounded but not dead, oozed toward him. Zane tried to stand, but his body wouldn't obey. The pain in his back intensified, becoming sharp, tearing. He felt something rupture through his skin, not plates this time, but something softer, more flexible. Tentacles. 4 of them, erupting from his upper back just below his shoulder blades. They were the same milky color as the slimes, tipped with dripping acid. They writhed in the air, independent of his conscious control. The slime was almost upon him. Zane didn't think, he acted. One of the new tentacles lashed out, striking the slime's main body. Where it touched, the slime's flesh sizzled and melted. The slime recoiled, quivering. Zane pushed himself up, focusing on the tentacles. They responded to his will, moving like extra limbs. He sent 2 tentacles forward, plunging them into the slime's body. Acid met acid, but his was stronger, or fresher. The slime's flesh dissolved around the points of impact, holes opening up that spread rapidly. The slime tried to retreat, but Zane pursued, driving his tentacles deeper, tearing it apart from within. The slime collapsed into a bubbling puddle, its form dissolving entirely. The arena fell silent for a moment, then erupted into chaotic noise, cheers, screams, sounds of disgust. Zane stood panting, his new tentacles retracting slowly, dripping acid onto the sand. He looked at his hands, the burns were already healing, new skin forming over the raw flesh. Another side effect of the evolution. Guards approached cautiously, weapons raised. Zane didn't resist as they led him away, back to the victor's cell. This one was slightly larger than the preparation chamber, with a cot and a basin of water. The door locked behind him. He sat on the cot, exhausted. The tentacles had fully retracted now, leaving only sore spots on his back. He focused, trying to summon them again. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, one tentacle emerged, then another. They extended to their full length, about 6 feet each, wavering in the air. Zane experimented, making them move in different directions. They were surprisingly dexterous, capable of fine movements. He had one tentacle pick up a metal cup from the basin. The moment the acidic tip touched the metal, the cup began to dissolve, melting into a lump of slag within seconds. He dropped it, staring. The acid was potent. Deadly. He flexed the tentacles, watching them drip onto the stone floor. The acid ate tiny pits into the stone. His eyes drifted to the cell door. It was made of solid metal bars, thick and reinforced. On impulse, he extended a tentacle, pressing the tip against one of the bars. The acid sizzled, eating into the metal. Within minutes, the bar was half dissolved, weakened enough that a strong kick might break it. Zane retracted the tentacle, his heart racing. He hadn't just gained a new weapon. He'd gained a tool for escape. But at what cost? He looked at his reflection in the water basin, a human face, attached to a body that was less human with every match. The chitin on his chest, the tentacles waiting beneath his skin. He was becoming a patchwork of horrors, a weapon of pure chaos. And the arena masters were watching. Learning. Planning his next match. He lay back on the cot, the tentacles retracting fully. The metal bar continued to sizzle softly in the corner, a reminder of what he was becoming. Outside, the crowd's roar echoed through the Colosseum, hungry for the next spectacle. Zane closed his eyes, but sleep didn't come. All he could see was acid melting through metal, and the endless, hungry eyes of the arena. The air in Zane's cell tasted of rust and stale sweat, a familiar bitterness that clung to his throat like a curse. He sat on the cold metal floor, his back pressed against the damp wall, the chitinous plates across his shoulders scraping with a faint, insectoid rasp. For acidic tentacles lay coiled behind him, dormant but pulsing with a low, corrosive energy that made the air shimmer. He flexed a hand, watching the dim light glint off the hardened carapace that now covered his chest and arms, a permanent reminder of the Skarax Beetle's heart he devoured in desperation. His reflection in a puddle of murky water showed a patchwork horror, a human face, gaunt and scarred, attached to a torso of alien armor, with fleshy tentacles sprouting like grotesque appendages. The nausea from assimilating the gelid slime's tentacle had faded, replaced by a dull ache that throbbed in time with his heartbeat. Footsteps echoed down the corridor outside, heavy and rhythmic. Zane tensed, his tentacles twitching instinctively. The door slid open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing two guards in polished armor, their faces hidden behind visors that reflected his monstrous form. They didn't speak, only gestured with energy rifles for him to move. Zane rose slowly, the weight of his mutations making each step deliberate. As he shuffled into the corridor, the guards flanked him, their silence more unnerving than any threat. The walls of the Starfall Colosseum loomed around him, carved from dark, iridescent stone that absorbed the light from flickering overhead panels. The air grew thicker with the scent of ozone and blood as they approached the arena gates. A roar erupted from beyond the gates, a cacophony of alien voices and mechanical cheers that vibrated through the floor. Zane's pulse quickened. The gates groaned open, revealing the vast, sand-covered arena under a dome of artificial stars. The crowd was a blur of colors and shapes, alien species packed into tiers, their eyes fixed on him with a mix of revulsion and hunger. At the center of the arena, two Skarax beetles scuttled, their chitinous shells glistening under the harsh lights, mandibles clicking with predatory intent. Beside them, a Vex raptor paced, its sleek, feathered body coiled with tension, talons digging into the sand. Zane's breath caught. A triple threat match, the masters were testing his limits, betting on his death. He stepped onto the sand, the grains crunching under his boots. The beetles turned as one, their compound eyes locking onto him. The raptor let out a piercing shriek, its voice cutting through the noise. Zane's mind raced. He had his chitin for defense, his acidic tentacles for offense, but outnumbered 3-1, survival would require more than brute force. The beetles charged first, their heavy bodies kicking up clouds of dust. Zane sidestepped, his tentacles lashing out. One struck a beetle's eye, acid sizzling as it melted through the chitin. The creature recoiled, blinded, its mandibles flailing wildly. The second beetle slammed into Zane's side, the impact jarring through his carapace. Pain flared, but the chitin held, deflecting the worst of the blow. The raptor seized the opening, leaping with claws extended. Zane rolled, sand spraying, as talons grazed his back. He came up swinging, a tentacle wrapping around the raptor's leg. Acid ate into feathers and flesh, but the creature twisted free, leaving a trail of smoking wounds. Zane's breaths came in ragged gasps. He needed to thin the numbers. Focusing, he directed two tentacles at the blinded beetle, driving them deep into its underbelly. Acid poured into its innards, and the creature shuddered, collapsing with a final, wet gurgle. The remaining beetle lunged, mandibles snapping. Zane met it head-on, using his chitin as a shield. The impact drove him back, but he held firm, tentacles coiling around the beetle's neck. With a wrench, he tore its head free, black ichor spraying across the sand. Only the raptor remained, its eyes gleaming with feral intelligence. It circled, wary of the acidic tentacles. Zane felt a surge of adrenaline. He feinted left, then dove right, his tentacles striking like vipers. The raptor dodged, its talons raking his arm, a shallow cut that burned. In close quarters, Zane grabbed its claw, the rough texture digging into his palm. With a roar of effort, he ripped it free, the bone snapping with a sickening crack. The raptor screeched, stumbling back. Without hesitation, Zane brought the claw to his mouth and bit down. The taste was metallic and foul, but he swallowed, triggering the Devourer's evolution. Agony exploded through him, a bone-deep fire that seared every nerve. He fell to his knees, sand grinding against his carapace. His hands contorted, fingers elongating as retractable talons erupted from his fingertips, sharp and black as obsidian. The pain subsided slowly, leaving him trembling. He flexed his new talons, feeling their deadly precision. The raptor, wounded and enraged, charged again. Zane rose, combining his mutations. He used his chitin to absorb a claw strike, the impact resonating through his body, then slashed with his talons, eviscerating the creature in a spray of blood and feathers. It collapsed, lifeless, at his feet. Silence fell over the arena, broken only by Zane's heavy breathing. He stood amidst the carnage, a patchwork of horrors, chitin, tentacles, and now talons, dripping with alien gore. The crowd's cheers were muted, a distant hum. Guards approached to drag the bodies away, their eyes avoiding his. As Zane was led back to his cell, the weight of his transformation settled deeper. In the dim light, he examined his talons, retracting and extending them with a thought. They were a weapon, yes, but each mutation cost a piece of his humanity. The cell door clanged shut behind him. He slumped against the wall, exhaustion washing over him. Minutes passed, the only sound the drip of water from a leaky pipe. Then, a faint rustle came from the bars. A scrap of folded material slid through, landing at his feet. Zane picked it up, unfolding it to reveal crude, handwritten symbols. "They're watching. You're not just a fighter, you're their experiment." He looked up, but the corridor was empty. The note felt heavy in his hand, its words echoing in the silence. The nightmares came every time Zane closed his eyes. Not of the arena, not of the monsters he'd killed, but of his own body turning against him. In the dream, his chitinous plates grew inward instead of outward, piercing his organs one by one while his acidic tentacles wrapped around his throat, dissolving flesh until only bone remained. He'd wake gasping, his human hands clawing at the carapace that now covered half his torso, feeling the alien texture that had become his skin. His cell was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of energy bars that kept him imprisoned. Zane sat on the cold floor, back against the wall, feeling the constant, maddening itch beneath his chitin. It wasn't a surface itch he could scratch, it came from deep within, as if his very bones were protesting their new configuration. He flexed his right hand, watching the retractable talons slide out from his fingertips with a soft click. They gleamed in the dim light, sharp and deadly, yet they felt as natural as his own fingernails had once been. That was the most terrifying part, how quickly the monstrous was becoming mundane. Across his back, the 4 acidic tentacles moved with a will of their own. When he wasn't consciously controlling them, they twitched and coiled like restless serpents. One brushed against the wall, and Zane heard the faint sizzle as it began eating through the metal. He forced it to still, feeling the strain in muscles he hadn't possessed a week ago. Every mutation came with new sensations, new instincts, new ways his body could betray him. The sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. Zane tensed, his talons extending fully. But it wasn't guards coming to drag him to another match, it was the familiar, cautious shuffle of another slave. A face appeared at the energy bars, gaunt and scarred but with eyes that held a sharp intelligence. "Kale," Zane said, his voice rough from disuse. The fellow slave glanced both ways before pressing closer to the bars. "They're talking about you in the master's quarters. I overheard 2 guards while they were moving corpses from the lower pits." Zane stood, his chitin scraping against the wall. "What are they saying?" "They're not just breeding monsters for the arena," Kale whispered, his voice barely audible. "The Empire is preparing for war. The Colosseum is a testing ground, they're experimenting with bioengineering, creating horrors they can deploy on battlefields across the galaxy. You're part of that experiment now. Your ability to assimilate traits, they see it as the ultimate weapon." Zane's stomach tightened. He looked down at his mutated hands, at the chitin covering his chest. "I'm becoming what they want me to be." "You're surviving," Kale corrected. "But every mutation comes at a cost. I've seen others who tried to cheat the system, slaves who stole enhancement drugs, who tried to graft alien parts onto themselves. They all went mad or died screaming as their bodies rejected the foreign biology. Your ability is different, but the principle remains, you're not just gaining power. You're losing yourself." Before Zane could respond, the heavy clang of armored boots approached. Kale melted back into the shadows just as 4 guards appeared, their energy rifles leveled at Zane's cell. "Match time, freak," the lead guard growled, deactivating the energy bars. "Try anything, and we'll stun you into compliance." Zane didn't resist as they clamped magnetic shackles around his wrists. The cold metal bit into his flesh where it met chitin. They marched him through the labyrinthine corridors of the Starfall Colosseum, past other cells where slaves watched with hollow eyes, past maintenance drones repairing blood-stained walls, past the stinking pits where alien monsters roared and scrabbled against their containment fields. The arena gate loomed ahead, a massive circular door of reinforced alloy. Beyond it, Zane could hear the crowd, a cacophony of alien voices, cheers and jeers blending into a single roar of anticipation. The guards shoved him forward, and the gate began to grind open. Light flooded in, harsh and artificial, illuminating an arena floor covered in coarse red sand. Zane stepped out, squinting against the glare. The Colosseum stretched upward in tiers, packed with thousands of spectators from dozens of species. In the highest box, he could make out the silhouettes of the arena masters, watching like scientists observing a petri dish. Across the arena, another gate was opening. What emerged wasn't a beast of claws and teeth, but something slender and pale, standing on two spindly legs. It had no visible eyes, just a smooth, featureless head with a wide, lipless mouth. Its skin shimmered with iridescent patterns that shifted like oil on water. A voice boomed through the arena's speakers, "Contestants. Today's match features our mutated human against a sonic shrieker from the silent moons of Xylos. Let the chaos begin." The shrieker didn't charge. It tilted its head, and Zane felt the air around him grow heavy, thick with potential energy. He dropped into a crouch, his chitinous plates shifting to cover his vital areas, his tentacles coiling behind him like ready whips. The first scream hit him like a physical blow. It wasn't sound as Zane understood it, it was vibration given form, a wave of force that bypassed his ears and struck directly at his brain. Pain exploded behind his eyes, white-hot and searing. He stumbled backward, his talons digging into the sand for balance. The world blurred, the crowd's cheers becoming a distant, muffled roar as if he were underwater. Zane shook his head, trying to clear the ringing in his skull. He focused on the shrieker, watching as its throat pulsed with the effort of generating another scream. He had to close the distance before it could attack again. He charged, his tentacles lashing out ahead of him, spraying arcs of acid toward the creature. The shrieker danced aside with unnatural grace, avoiding the corrosive droplets. Its mouth opened wide, and another scream tore through the arena. This one was different, sharper, more focused. Zane threw up his arms, his chitinous carapace taking the brunt of the attack. The sound wave struck the plates, and he heard it, a sharp crack, like ice breaking under pressure. A fissure appeared in the chitin covering his left shoulder, spiderwebbing outward. Pain lanced through him, fresh and immediate, cutting through the mental fog of the sonic assault. The shrieker advanced, its throat pulsing rhythmically now, building toward another attack. Zane knew he couldn't withstand another direct hit, his carapace was compromised, and his mind was already reeling. He needed to end this quickly. As the creature prepared to scream again, Zane did the only thing he could think of, he screamed back. Not with sound, but with motion. He launched himself forward, not in a straight line but in a zigzag pattern, his talons tearing up clumps of sand to create an obscuring cloud. The shrieker tracked him, its head turning smoothly, but Zane was already changing direction, using his tentacles to propel himself in an unexpected arc. He came in from the side, his talons aimed not at the creature's body but at its throat. The shrieker tried to twist away, but Zane's acidic tentacles wrapped around its spindly legs, burning through flesh and bone. The creature stumbled, its concentration broken. Zane's talons found their mark. He didn't slash, he dug, his claws sinking into the pale flesh of the shrieker's neck. The creature thrashed, its silent screams becoming physical convulsions. With a brutal twist, Zane tore open its throat. What emerged wasn't blood, but a cluster of crystalline cords that pulsed with faint light. Vocal cords, but unlike anything human. They glistened with viscous fluid, vibrating faintly even as the creature died. Zane didn't hesitate. He ripped them free, the cords coming away with a wet, tearing sound. The crowd fell silent, watching as he raised the glistening mass to his mouth. He could feel the arena masters leaning forward in their box, observing, recording. The cords tasted like ozone and copper, with a texture like gelatinous cartilage. Zane forced himself to chew, to swallow, feeling the foreign biology slide down his throat. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the pain came. It started in his ears, a deep, throbbing agony as if needles were being driven through his eardrums. He fell to his knees, hands clutching his head as blood began to trickle from both ears, warm and sticky. The world went silent. Not quiet, completely, utterly silent. He could see the crowd roaring, could see the shrieker's corpse twitching, but he heard nothing. Inside his throat, something was changing. His vocal cords burned, reshaping themselves, adapting to produce frequencies they were never meant to produce. The pain spread through his jaw, his sinuses, the bones of his skull vibrating with the transformation. Zane opened his mouth, not to scream, but to test what had been given to him. What emerged wasn't sound at first, it was pressure, a visible distortion in the air that rippled outward from his lips. Then the sound followed, a roar that started low and built into a shattering crescendo, a wave of sonic force that struck the dead Shrieker's body and sent it skidding backward across the sand. The arena's sound-dampening fields flickered, struggling to contain the blast. Spectators in the front rows clutched their heads, some collapsing as the vibrations hit them. Zane's roar cut off abruptly as his newly transformed vocal cords seized. He gasped, blood dripping from his ears onto the sand. The deafness was complete, he couldn't even hear his own breathing. But he could feel the power thrumming in his throat, waiting to be unleashed again. The match was over. Guards approached cautiously, their weapons raised. Zane didn't fight as they shackled him and dragged him from the arena. He kept his head down, watching the red sand give way to polished metal floors, his own blood leaving a trail behind him. Back in his cell, the energy bars reactivated with a silent hum. Zane slumped against the wall, his body trembling with exhaustion and pain. The deafness began to recede slowly, replaced by a high-pitched ringing that made his head ache. He could hear again, but everything was muffled, distorted, as if he were listening through layers of cloth. He looked at his hands, at the chitin covering his arms, at the tentacles that now lay limp across the floor. He was adding another piece to the patchwork horror he was becoming. A sonic roar to shatter minds. Acid to melt flesh. Talons to tear. Chitin to withstand. What was left of the human he'd been? A spasm racked his body, sudden and violent. He doubled over, retching onto the cell floor. What came up wasn't food, he hadn't eaten real food in days, but a thick, black bile that smelled of chemicals and decay. It pooled on the metal, sizzling faintly as it ate through the surface. Zane wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and that's when he saw it. On his forearm, where the chitin met human skin, tiny scales were emerging. Not chitin, not flesh, but something in between, iridescent and faint, like the shimmer on the Shrieker's skin. They spread as he watched, creeping up his arm in a slow, inexorable crawl. He tried to scrape them off with his talons, but they were part of him, growing from his own flesh. A side effect. An uncontrolled mutation. The cost of evolution paid in the currency of his own humanity. Zane stared at the scales, at the black bile eating through the floor, at his own monstrous reflection in the polished metal wall. Somewhere in the silent depths of his cell, he began to laugh, a sound that started as a chuckle and built into something desperate and broken, until even that turned into a faint, distorted echo of the sonic roar now permanently etched into his biology. The slop they called food was cold and gray, clinging to the metal bowl with a gelatinous sheen. Zane sat in his cell, the chitinous plates along his back scraping against the rough stone wall as he shifted position. His fingers, still mostly human, though the nails had thickened into something closer to claws, trembled slightly as he lifted a spoonful to his mouth. The taste was nothing, just texture and the faint chemical tang of nutrient paste, but he forced it down. Every calorie mattered now. Across the narrow corridor, separated by energy bars that hummed with a low, persistent vibration, Kale did the same. The other slave was lean where Zane was becoming broad, his movements economical and precise. His eyes, dark and sharp, flicked up to meet Zane's between bites. "They feed us at the same time every cycle," Kale whispered, his voice barely audible over the distant roar of the Colosseum crowds. The guards change shifts then. For 90 seconds, the surveillance drones recalibrate. Zane chewed slowly, keeping his own voice low. "You've timed it. Timing is all we have." Kale set his bowl aside, leaning closer to the bars. The faint blue light from the energy field cast strange shadows across his face. The Colosseum isn't just an arena. It's a machine. Every match, every monster, every death, it's data for them. They're building something. You said that before. War creatures. Zane remembered the nightmares, the feeling of his skin prickling with emerging scales that hadn't been there when he woke. His body was a ledger of consumed horrors, each entry paid for in pain. More than that. Kale's fingers traced invisible lines on the floor. The control center. It's buried 3 levels below the main arena floor. That's where they regulate everything, the energy shields, the monster pens, the environmental systems. If you want out, you don't just break your chains. You break the machine. Zane felt the acidic tentacles coiled against his spine twitch in response to his rising tension. And how do we reach it? Through the front gates. A faint, grim smile touched Kale's lips. There are service tunnels. Maintenance access for the drones. I've mapped what I can from cleaning duty rotations. But the control center itself is shielded. Heavily. You can't just smash your way in. So we need a key. We need a distraction. Something big enough to pull all their attention to the arena while we move below. Kale's eyes held Zane's. You're becoming that distraction. Every match, you change. They're watching, recording, adjusting the threats. They want to see how far you can be pushed before you break. Zane looked down at his hands. The retractable talons from the Vex Raptor lay dormant beneath his skin, but he could feel them, like buried knives waiting to be drawn. I'm breaking already, he said quietly. Every time I use these things. Every time I eat another piece of something that shouldn't be food. I can feel it changing me. Not just the body. The mind. Kale was silent for a long moment. Then make the change useful. Don't just survive the matches. Study them. The arena masters aren't gods. They're engineers. They build puzzles and drop us into them. Solve the puzzle, and you learn how the machine works. The warning chime echoed through the cell block, 2 minutes until meal time ended. Kale leaned back, picking up his bowl again. Next match. They'll send something designed to counter your last victory. Think about that. Not just how to kill it. How to take something from it that they didn't expect you to take. Zane nodded, the motion feeling stiff, unnatural. His neck didn't bend quite right anymore, the chitin plates interfering. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, Kale whispered as the guard's footsteps approached. We're both still in the machine. The arena sand was pale and glittering, crushed crystal from some dead moon, and it crunched under Zane's feet as he was shoved through the gate. The roar of the crowd was a physical force, a wall of sound that vibrated in his newly sensitive ears, still ringing faintly from the sonic roar he'd used last match. He blinked, trying to clear the persistent blur at the edges of his vision. The scales along his forearms caught the harsh arena lights, shimmering with an oily, iridescent sheen. Across the circular combat zone, a gate hissed open. What emerged wasn't a beast of flesh and fury, but something crystalline and deliberate. It moved on 6 jointed legs, each tip tapping against the sand with a sound like chimes. Its body was a faceted mass of translucent armor, reflecting the arena lights in dazzling, painful patterns. A crystal crawler, Zane realized. He'd seen sketches in the data pads the medics sometimes left behind. Bioengineered for defense. Nearly impervious to physical strikes. The crawler's head, if it could be called a head, was a cluster of geometric shapes, with a single, large crystal eye at its center that glowed with a soft blue light. It didn't charge. It advanced, methodical, each step measured. Testing. Zane's first instinct was to strike fast. He lunged, his talons extending from his fingertips with a wet, tearing sound. They scraped across the crawler's flank, and sparked, deflected, leaving only faint white scratches on the crystal surface. The impact jarred up his arm, bone deep. He hissed, pulling back. The crawler pivoted, one of its legs lashing out. Zane brought up his chitinous forearm, taking the blow. The crystal tip struck with surprising force, cracking one of the plates. Pain flared, hot and sharp. He staggered, his acidic tentacles unfurling from his back in response to the threat. They lashed out, spraying corrosive fluid across the crawler's side. The acid sizzled, eating into the crystal, but slowly, too slowly. The crawler seemed almost indifferent, the damaged areas fogging over as new crystal growth sealed the wounds. It was regenerating. Zane felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Brute force wouldn't work. Direct acid wouldn't work. He needed a weakness. He circled, keeping distance, watching the way the crawler moved. Its eye tracked him, the blue light within pulsing in time with its steps. Every time Zane shifted, the eye adjusted, recalculating. It was studying him too. Kale's words echoed in his mind. Solve the puzzle. The crawler's armor was reflective. Deflective. It turned force back on the attacker. But sound was different. Sound traveled through materials, vibrated them from within. Zane remembered the sonic shrieker, how its screams had cracked his own chitin. Could he do the same? He backed toward one of the arena's support columns, a thick pillar of fused metal and stone. The crawler followed, its crystal legs tapping closer. Zane waited until it was within 10 paces, then drew in a breath that burned his throat. The sonic roar built in his chest, a pressure that made his ribs ache. He unleashed it. The sound wasn't a scream, but a focused cone of concussive force. It hit the crawler head-on. The crystal armor didn't deflect it, it resonated. A high, sharp ringing filled the arena, and the crawler staggered, its legs trembling. The blue light in its eye flickered, dimmed. For a moment it was disoriented, its precise movements becoming clumsy. Zane didn't hesitate. He charged, not at the body, but at the head. His talons aimed for the eye. The crawler tried to bring up a leg to block, but it was still unsteady. Zane's claws sank into the crystal around the eye, not deep, but enough to get purchase. He wrenched, twisting. The crystal cracked, spiderwebbing with fractures. The blue light flared, then died. The crawler went rigid, its legs locking. Blind, or close to it. Zane didn't let go. He dug his fingers into the crack, pulling, until the entire crystal lens popped free with a sound like breaking glass. It lay in his palm, cool and smooth, still faintly glowing from within. He didn't think. He brought it to his mouth and bit down. The crystal shattered between his teeth, sharp edges cutting his gums. He swallowed fragments, feeling them scrape down his throat. Almost immediately, the Devourer's evolution triggered. This pain was different. Not the bone-deep agony of the talons or the nausea of the tentacles. This was a wrongness in his eyes, a pressure building behind them until he thought they might burst. He fell to his knees, clutching his face. The world blurred, colors bleeding together, shapes losing their edges. He could see the crawler, but it was a smear of light and shadow, indistinct. He could see the crowd, but they were a swirling mass of noise and motion without form. But within that blur, something else emerged. Light itself became malleable. He could see the paths it took, the way it bent around objects. The crawler, now stumbling blindly, was outlined in a faint shimmer, the refraction of arena lights off its crystal body. And there, at the joints where its legs met its torso, the light bent differently. Weak points. Stress fractures in the armor. Zane pushed himself up, blinking rapidly. His vision was a mess, but he could use the mess. He focused on one of those weak points, where the light warped in a specific pattern. He lunged, not with precision, but with direction guided by the bend of photons. His talons struck true, sinking into a seam in the crystal. The crawler shuddered, a crack propagating through its body. Zane ripped, and the leg came away in a shower of crystalline shards. The crawler collapsed, its remaining legs twitching. Zane finished it with a series of targeted strikes, each aimed at the distortions in light that marked its vulnerabilities. When it finally lay still, a shattered heap of refracting prisms, the arena was silent for a beat, then erupted into confused, roaring approval. Zane stood over the corpse, breathing hard. His eyes burned, tears streaking through the grime on his face. He could barely make out the gates, the shapes of the guards coming to retrieve him. Everything was soft focus, edges blending into haze. But he had won. And he had taken something new. Back in his cell, hours later, the blurred vision persisted. He sat in the corner, pressing the heels of his hands against his closed eyes, trying to will the world back into sharpness. It didn't work. The light refraction was his now, a permanent adjustment to his sight, paid for with clarity. The cell door hissed open. Not the usual guards. A figure stood silhouetted against the brighter light of the corridor, tall, draped in the ornate robes of the arena masters. Zane didn't need clear vision to recognize the authority in that posture. "You continue to surprise us, specimen," the master said, his voice smooth, devoid of the rough edges of the guards or the cold curiosity of the medic. "Adaptation under pressure. Ingenious use of acquired traits. You're exceeding projected parameters." Zane stayed silent, watching the blurry shape approach. The master stopped just outside the energy bars. A device in his hand activated, projecting a hologram into the center of the cell. Even with his impaired vision, Zane could make out the general form, something massive, multi-limbed, with too many eyes and a mouth that seemed to split its body in half. It shifted in the hologram, a simulation of movement that was unnervingly fluid. "Your next opponent," the master said. "The next phase of testing. The elite rounds await, if you prove capable." The hologram zoomed in on the creature's head, revealing layers of overlapping plates, organic circuitry pulsing beneath translucent skin. A bioengineered horror, designed from the genetic material of 7 conquered species. "We call it the amalgam." The image held for a moment longer, then flickered out. The master turned to leave. "Rest, specimen. You'll need it." The door sealed shut, leaving Zane alone in the dim cell. He stared at the space where the hologram had been, the afterimage burned into his blurry sight. The amalgam. Not a monster born, but built. A puzzle made of flesh and nightmare. And he was expected to solve it with stolen pieces of other nightmares. He leaned his head back against the wall, feeling the new, subtle way light bent around his own form, a faint shimmer in the air, like heat haze off sand. He had become a strategist, out of necessity. And the game was about to change. The cell door hissed open with a sound like a dying beast, and Zane felt the cold grip of energy restraints clamp around his wrists. Two hulking guards, their forms obscured by featureless black armor that absorbed light, hauled him from the familiar damp stone of his old cell. The air changed as they moved through corridors he'd never seen, becoming sterile and sharp with the scent of ozone and disinfectant. Gone were the rough-hewn walls stained with blood and grime. Here, everything was polished obsidian metal, humming with hidden power. Glowing blue strips along the floor cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe like living things. Zane's body protested the movement. The faint iridescent scales that had sprouted across his shoulders and back itched beneath his tattered slave tunic, a constant reminder of the uncontrolled mutations gnawing at his humanity. His vision still held a faint blur at the edges from the light refraction ability he'd gained from the crystal crawler, making the sleek corridors swim slightly. He flexed his hands, feeling the retractable talons hidden beneath his skin, ready to spring forth at a moment's agony. The chitinous carapace plates along his forearms and chest felt heavier here, as if the very air pressed down on them. They passed viewing ports that looked out into training pits where other gladiators sparred. Zane caught glimpses of aliens he'd only heard whispers about, a four-armed warrior with skin like molten bronze, moving with impossible grace, a creature that seemed made of shifting shadows, its form never quite solid. These were not the mindless monsters he'd faced in the lower arenas. These were killers honed by countless matches, their eyes holding a cold calculation that chilled him more than any beast's roar. The guards shoved him into a new cell, larger, but no less a cage. The walls were transparent energy fields on three sides, offering a panoramic view of the elite wing's central hub. Across the way, he could see other prisoners pacing or meditating, their mutations on full display like badges of honor and horror. A holographic display flickered to life in the center of his cell, showing his next match details. The crowd's roar from some distant arena filtered through, but here it was muted, replaced by the low thrum of machinery. Betting odds scrolled alongside his image, now a patchwork of chitin, scales, and too pale human skin, with wagers not on whether he'd survive, but on how many of his mutations he'd use. Over, under 3.5 abilities, one line read. Zane's jaw tightened. They were treating him like a novelty act, a thing to be dissected and wagered on. He thought of Kale's warning about the Arena Master's experiments, and the hologram of the amalgam they'd shown him. This was just another step in their testing. Too soon, the energy field on one wall dissolved, and the guards returned. They led him through a tunnel that sloped downward, the air growing hot and dry. The roar of the crowd swelled, becoming a physical force that vibrated through the metal floor. Zane emerged into an arena unlike any he'd seen before. It was smaller, more intimate, with tiered seating rising steeply on all sides, packed with aliens and finery that glittered under harsh white lights. The sand was black, flecked with crystalline shards that reflected the glare. At the far end, a gate groaned open, and his opponent stepped out. The pyrophage stood 8 feet tall, its body a sleek, segmented exoskeleton the color of cooled magma. Heat shimmered around it in visible waves, distorting the air. Its head was a tapered wedge with no visible eyes, only a slit where a mouth should be. As it moved, the joints of its limbs hissed, venting steam. Zane's new light refraction ability kicked in instinctively, showing him weak points, stress fractures in the exoskeleton at the joints, and a concentrated glow in the creature's chest where something pulsed with violent energy. But it also revealed the sheer heat radiating from the phage, the air around it bent light into painful ripples. The match began without ceremony. The pyrophage didn't charge, it exhaled. A stream of plasma, white-hot and roaring like a star's birth, shot across the arena. Zane dove sideways, but the edge of the blast caught his left arm. His chitinous carapace, which had deflected claws and sonic screams, blackened and cracked instantly. Agony lanced up his arm, a searing pain that smelled of his own burning flesh and melted chitin. He rolled, coming up with his acidic tentacles already erupting from his back. They lashed out, spraying corrosive fluid, but the phage's exoskeleton shed the acid like water, the droplets sizzling harmlessly on the hot surface. Zane retreated, his mind racing. His sonic roar might disorient it, but in this enclosed space, the backlash could shatter his own eardrums again. The talons were useless at a distance. The phage advanced, methodical, each step leaving smoldering footprints in the black sand. It breathed again, and Zane barely avoided the full blast, the heat singing his hair and blistering the skin on his neck. He could feel the crowd's anticipation. They were waiting for him to use another mutation, to become the monster they'd paid to see. Then he remembered the glow in the phage's chest. His light refraction showed it clearly, a gland-like organ, pulsing with fiery energy, connected to the creature's core. If he could sever that. The phage breathed a third time, and Zane didn't dodge fully. He let the plasma graze his side, the pain blinding, but he used the momentum to surge forward. His talons snapped out, and he drove them into the stress fracture at the phage's shoulder joint. The exoskeleton gave way with a crack, and the creature staggered, its plasma breath sputtering. Zane didn't hesitate. He wrapped his acidic tentacles around the phage's neck, not to corrode, but to hold it still. With his other hand, he plunged his talons deep into the glowing spot on its chest. His fingers closed around something hot and fibrous, the flame gland. He ripped it free in a spray of molten ichor. The phage shuddered, its systems failing, and collapsed. Zane stood panting, the gland steaming in his hand. It was still alive, pulsing weakly. The Devourer's evolution screamed in his blood, a hunger that overrode the pain of his burns. He brought it to his mouth and bit down. The taste was like swallowing liquid fire. It burned through his throat, his stomach, spreading through his veins. He fell to his knees, choking, as internal burns seared him from within. His vision went white with agony. He could feel his skin changing, hardening, becoming something that could withstand heat. The scales across his shoulders glowed red-hot, then cooled into a pattern of dark, fire-resistant plates. In his throat, something new formed, a secondary set of vocal cords that hummed with contained energy. When the pain subsided to a dull roar, Zane pushed himself up. He looked at the fallen phage, then at his own hands. His skin, where it wasn't covered in chitin or scales, had taken on a faint, charcoal-gray hue, tough and leathery. He took a breath, and sparks danced at the back of his throat. He exhaled, and a short jet of flame, not plasma, but actual fire, shot out, scorching the sand at his feet. The crowd erupted, but their cheers felt distant. Zane's body was a tapestry of stolen parts, and each new thread tightened the noose around his soul. He limped from the arena, the guards' grips impersonal as they dragged him back to his cell. The energy field sealed behind him, and he slumped against the wall, tasting ash and blood. His internal burns ached with every breath. Through the transparent wall, he watched the hub, his new fire-resistant skin still tingling with unnatural heat. Then he saw movement. Guards, the same black-armored brutes, were hauling another prisoner into the elite wing. The prisoner fought, but weakly, his form familiar even at a distance. Kale. His friend's face was bruised, one eye swollen shut. They threw him into a cell directly opposite Zane's. Kale looked up, and their eyes met across the space. No note passed through bars this time, only a look of dawning horror. An arena master's voice crackled over the intercom, cold and amused. "Congratulations, Zane. Your next opponent has been selected. A familiar face should make for interesting betting." The energy fields remained up, but the message was clear. Zane stared at Kale, the sparks in his throat dying to embers. The gauntlet had just begun, and the masters had found a new way to break him. The arena sands were cold beneath Zane's feet, a stark contrast to the searing heat of the elite wings holding cells. Overhead, the Starfall Colosseum's energy dome shimmered with artificial constellations, casting an eerie blue glow across the combat pit. The air smelled of ozone and old blood, with the distant hum of repulsor engines vibrating through the metal grates beneath the sand. Zane stood at one end of the oval-shaped arena, his patchwork body a testament to months of forced evolution. The chitinous plates along his shoulders and back gleamed dully under the dome lights, while faint iridescent scales shimmered across his forearms, unwelcome souvenirs from his last uncontrolled mutation. His acidic tentacles lay coiled at his sides, their gelatinous surfaces occasionally bubbling with contained caustic fluid. He flexed his retractable talons, the Vex Raptor claws extending with a sharp click that echoed in the sudden silence of the crowd. At the opposite end of the arena, Kale emerged from a sliding metal door. The fellow slave moved with a stiffness that spoke of recent injuries, a slight limp in his right leg, bruises visible along his neck where the arena master's shock collars had bitten deep. Kale wore standard Gladiator leathers, but his hands were encased in bulky electrified gauntlets that crackled with blue-white energy. The gauntlets looked crude and heavy, their power cells glowing ominously through reinforced glass viewports. Zane's stomach tightened. Kale had been the only voice of reason in this hellscape, the one who'd revealed the Colosseum's secrets, who'd mapped the control center, who'd whispered escape plans during meal times when the guards weren't looking. Now they stood 70 paces apart, with 10,000 alien spectators watching from tiered seating that rose toward the dome like the layers of some grotesque wedding cake. A holographic projection flickered to life above the arena center. The arena master's face, a pale, hairless alien with too many eyes, materialized in shimmering light. Elite Round 2, the voice boomed through hidden speakers, distorted by translation software into a flat, emotionless monotone. The Devourer versus the Strategist. Fight with honor, or die with shame. Zane's eyes met Kale's across the distance. Kale gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head, a warning, a plea, a shared understanding. Then the starting horn blared, a deafening sound that made Zane's ears ache with remembered trauma from his sonic roar mutation. Kale charged first, his electrified gauntlets leaving trails of sparks in the air. Zane raised his chitin-plated arms defensively, calculating distances. When Kale swung, the blow was theatrical, wide, telegraphed, meant to be dodged. Zane sidestepped, his talons scraping against Kale's leather armor in a shower of artificial sparks that looked far more dangerous than they actually were. They circled, trading blows that looked vicious from the stands but were carefully controlled up close. Zane's acidic tentacles lashed out, deliberately missing Kale's torso by inches, instead striking the sand where they sizzled and steamed. Kale's electrified gauntlets crackled near Zane's face, the ozone smell overwhelming at this distance. On their third pass, as Zane pretended to stumble over uneven sand, Kale closed the gap. His lips barely moved, but the whisper carried in the brief moment their bodies shielded each other from certain viewing angles. They're watching through thermal scanners. We need real damage. Zane nodded almost imperceptibly. He extended his left acidic tentacle, the gelatinous appendage quivering with contained power. Kale's eyes widened for a fraction of a second, then he brought his electrified gauntlet down in a controlled arc. The energy field sheared through the tentacle's outer layer, cauterizing as it cut. White-hot pain lanced up Zane's arm, so intense his vision swam with black spots. The severed portion of tentacle fell to the sand, still twitching and bubbling. Zane staggered back, genuine agony contorting his features. The crowd roared, this was the violence they'd paid to see. Through the pain, Zane focused on the Devourer's evolution ability thrumming in his veins like a second heartbeat. He needed regeneration, and he remembered the bioengineered horror he'd faced in nightmares since the Arena Master's hologram preview, the amalgam, designed from 7 species, surely possessing regenerative traits he'd assimilated at some subconscious level. Dropping to one knee, Zane brought the bleeding stump of his tentacle to his mouth. He didn't devour the severed piece, that was alien flesh, not his own. Instead, he bit deep into his own forearm, tearing away a chunk of his mutated flesh where the iridescent scales met normal human skin. The taste was coppery and wrong, laced with chemicals and alien biology. He swallowed, triggering the Devourer's evolution. The cost was immediate and brutal. A wave of weakness washed over him as his body redirected energy to the forced mutation. His vision tunneled, his heartbeat thundered in his ears, and he felt as though someone had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart. But beneath the pain, something shifted. The bleeding from his tentacle stump slowed, then stopped. New tissue began to knit together, not the original acidic tentacle, but a crude, pinkish regeneration that sealed the wound. Zane rose, the regeneration still visible and raw. He charged Kale, this time with more force. Their collision sent them both sprawling into the sand. As they grappled, Kale whispered again, his breath hot against Zane's ear. On 3, we fall together. Sell it. They broke apart, trading blows that grew progressively weaker. Zane's movements became sluggish, his regeneration draining his reserves. Kale's attacks lost their precision, his electrified gauntlets sputtering as their power cells depleted. On the silent count of 3, Zane took a wild swing that Kale didn't bother to block, it glanced off his shoulder with minimal force. Simultaneously, Kale delivered a light tap to Zane's chest with a gauntlet that now emitted only faint static. They collapsed together, Zane's chitinous carapace scraping against Kale's leathers as they hit the sand. Zane made sure to land partly on his regenerating tentacle stump, the raw flesh grinding into the coarse grains. He groaned, the sound only half feigned. Beside him, Kale's breathing came in ragged gasps. Silence fell over the Colosseum. The crowd's murmurs grew into confused chatter. No victor had been declared. No death had occurred. The holographic arena master reappeared, its multiple eyes blinking in sequence. A drawl. The translated voice held what might have been amusement or annoyance, it was impossible to tell with the flat effect. How unconventional. Zane kept his face pressed against the sand, watching through slitted eyes as maintenance drones hovered at the arena's edge, their sensor arrays sweeping over both combatants. He could feel Kale's shoulder pressed against his, a point of warmth in the cold arena. Then the arena master's projection shifted, showing not just its face but a schematic of the Colosseum. Since you fight as one, the voice boomed, you shall face the next challenge as one. Prepare for a team match. Your opponents, a bonded pair of psionic weavers. They read thoughts, shatter minds, and have never been defeated in tandem combat. The hologram dissolved, replaced by a rotating image of two willowy aliens with too many joints in their limbs and crystalline growths protruding from their temples. Zane's stomach dropped. Psychic aliens, like the one Kale had warned him about, the one that had nearly broken another gladiator's mind. As guards approached to drag them back to their cells, Zane caught Kale's eye. The strategist's expression was grim, his usual calculating calm replaced by genuine fear. They'd survived fighting each other only to face something that could attack what little of their minds remained intact. The sand felt colder than ever as Zane was hauled to his feet, his regenerated tentacle stump throbbing with every heartbeat. The masters had seen through their ruse, and the price would be paid in the next round, not with blood, but with sanity itself. The arena sand felt different beneath Zane's feet, coarser, colder, as if the very ground had been treated to resist psychic residue. He stood beside Kale in the elite wing's central pit, a circular space 50 meters across with obsidian walls that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. Above, the holographic displays flickered with alien script announcing their opponents, psionic leeches, class Delta psychic entities. The crowd's usual roar was muted here, replaced by a low hum that vibrated through Zane's chitinous carapace. Kale adjusted the electrified gauntlets on his wrists, his movements stiff. They're going to attack our minds, not our bodies, he said, his voice barely audible over the hum. Stay focused on what's real. Zane nodded, his retractable talons extending with a soft click. The limited light refraction from his crystal crawler mutation made the arena's energy barriers shimmer with faint stress patterns, but his vision remained clear, the blurred aftereffects from that assimilation had finally faded. He could feel the fire-resistant skin beneath his carapace, a dull warmth from the pyrophage's flame gland he'd consumed, and the acidic tentacles coiled at his sides, still tender from the forced regeneration in his last match. His body was a patchwork of alien horrors, each piece a memory of survival paid for in pain. Two figures emerged from the opposite gate, gliding rather than walking. The psionic leeches were humanoid in shape but translucent, their forms shifting like liquid shadow under a dim light. They had no visible eyes, only smooth heads that pulsed with a soft violet glow. As they moved, the air around them warped, distorting the sand into rippling patterns. Zane braced himself, but the attack didn't come as a physical blow. One moment he was scanning for weak points, the next he was standing in a field on earth, the sun warm on his face, the smell of grass and damp soil filling his nostrils. He could hear laughter, his sister's, from years before the slavers came. She was calling his name, her voice bright and unbroken. The vision was so vivid he could feel the breeze, see the dandelions swaying. A part of him knew it was an illusion, but the despair that followed was real, a crushing weight that made his knees buckle. He was back in the Colosseum, a slave, a monster, everything he'd lost screaming in his mind. He sank to one knee, the sand grinding against his carapace. The arena walls blurred into the field's horizon, and he saw his own hands, human, unmarked, reaching for his sister. Then her face melted into the leering mask of an arena master, and the field dissolved into chains and blood. Zane gasped, his sonic roar building in his throat, but he couldn't force it out. The psychic assault wasn't just showing him memories, it was amplifying the grief, twisting it into a loop of hopelessness. He clutched his head, his talons digging into his own flesh, the pain a distant anchor. Zane. Kale's voice cut through the haze, sharp and urgent. A jolt of electricity snapped from Kale's gauntlet, not at the leeches but into the sand near Zane's feet. The spark grounded him, the sudden smell of ozone pulling him back. Zane blinked, his vision clearing to show Kale standing over him, one gauntlet raised defensively. The leeches had advanced, their psychic waves manifesting as visible distortions in the air, like heat shimmer over desert rock. They feed on despair, Kale shouted, his eyes wide with strain. Fight it. Zane pushed himself up, his body trembling. He focused on the physical sensations, the rough texture of his carapace, the acidic burn of his tentacles, the warmth of his fire-resistant skin. Reality solidified around him. With a roar that tore from his mutated vocal cords, he unleashed his sonic ability. The sound wave ripped through the arena, visible as a ripple in the distorted air. It struck the nearest leech, and the creature staggered, its translucent form flickering like a faulty hologram. The psychic pressure eased, but only for a moment. The leeches recovered quickly, their glow intensifying. They split apart, one targeting Zane, the other Kale. Zane felt the assault return, this time as a barrage of fragmented images, the Skarax Beetle's heart he devoured, the gelid slime's tentacles writhing in his grip, the crystal crawler's eye bursting in his mouth. Each memory carried the excruciating pain of his mutations, amplified tenfold. He stumbled, his light refraction showing him the leech's weak points as pulsing nodes in its chest, but his mind couldn't coordinate the attack. Kale was faring no better. He swung his gauntlets at the other leech, but his movements were sluggish, as if fighting through thick mud. Electricity crackled harmlessly through the creature's form. "We need to disrupt them simultaneously," Kale yelled, his voice strained with mental effort. Zane forced himself forward, each step a battle against the hallucinations. He saw the arena masters watching from their balcony, their alien faces indifferent. He saw the medic with 4 arms, examining him like a specimen. The visions threatened to swallow him again, but he clung to Kale's words, "Break the cycle." With a grunt, he charged the leech targeting him, his talons extended. As he slashed, the creature phased through the attack, but Zane had anticipated it. He exhaled sharply, sparks flying from his mouth, a weak imitation of the pyrophage's plasma, but enough to singe the leech's form where his light refraction showed a node. The leech recoiled, its psychic waves faltering. In that instant, Zane lunged, his acidic tentacles whipping out. They connected with the node, and the creature screamed, a soundless vibration that rattled Zane's bones. It collapsed, its form solidifying into a corporeal mass. Without hesitation, Zane drove his talons into its head, tearing it open. Inside, a brain-like organ pulsed with violet light. He didn't think, he acted on instinct forged in survival. He ripped it out and devoured it, the tissue slick and cold against his tongue. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. It wasn't the physical agony of his previous mutations, but a psychic torrent that flooded his mind. Visions erupted behind his eyes, not his own memories, but fragmented experiences from countless victims, aliens screaming in dark labs, slaves broken in arenas, monsters bred and discarded. He saw the leech's own existence, a cycle of feeding and being fed upon. The migraine struck like hammer blows, each pulse of pain blurring his vision and making his carapace feel like a prison. He fell to his knees, clutching his head as the Devourer's evolution took hold. But with the pain came a new sense, a faint, empathic awareness. He could feel the remaining leech's movements as subtle shifts in the psychic field, like ripples in water. He could sense Kale's determination, a steady pulse amidst the chaos. "Left, now." Zane gasped, the words barely audible through his pain. Kale didn't hesitate. He pivoted and slammed his electrified gauntlet into the space Zane indicated. The leech materialized there, caught off guard. Electricity surged through it, and its form crackled with energy. Zane pushed through his migraines, using his new telepathic empathy to guide Kale's strikes. Together, they cornered the creature, Zane's sonic roar keeping it disoriented while Kale delivered the final blow. The leech dissolved into mist, leaving only a stain on the sand. The arena fell silent, the hum fading. Zane remained on his knees, his mind reeling. The horrific visions had subsided, but they lingered at the edges of his consciousness, a permanent scar. He could feel the telepathic empathy as a constant low-level awareness, the crowd's bloodlust, Kale's relief, the distant hum of the Colosseum's machinery. It was useful, but it came with a cost, every emotion around him felt amplified, raw, and exhausting. Kale helped him to his feet. "What did it give you?" he asked, his voice cautious. "Their thoughts, or echoes of them," Zane muttered, rubbing his temples. The migraines were dulling to a persistent ache. "I can sense movements, intentions. But it's loud." As they limped toward the exit gate, the arena master's holographic faces appeared above, their expressions unreadable. No announcement came, only the slow retraction of the gates. But as Zane passed into the tunnel, a whisper brushed against his mind, not his own thought, not Kale's, but something distant and ancient, echoing from deep within the Colosseum's foundations. It was faint, layered with suffering, and it carried a single, clear message: we are all experiments. Break the cycle. Zane froze, his new empathy straining to trace the source. It felt like a chorus of voices, alien and human, twisted together. Kale looked at him, questioning, but Zane shook his head. The whisper faded, leaving only the ache in his mind and a chilling certainty. The Colosseum's horrors ran deeper than the arena sands. The air in the holding cell tasted of ozone and stale sweat. Zane sat against the damp stone wall, his chitinous carapace scraping softly with each shallow breath. The muscle spasms from his recent shape-shifting mutation came in waves, tiny tremors that danced across his fire-resistant skin like invisible insects. He flexed his retractable talons, watching the dim light catch on their razor edges, then let them slide back into his flesh with a wet, organic sound that still made his stomach clench. Kale sat opposite him, cleaning a stolen maintenance tool with methodical precision. The other slave's eyes were shadowed, the blue-gray skin of his face tight with tension. They hadn't spoken since returning from the breeding pits, but the stolen access card burned between them like a secret flame. "We need to be ready," Kale had said last night, his voice barely a whisper. "The tournament is coming." Zane's telepathic empathy, that scarred gift from the psionic leech's brain, picked up the unspoken fear beneath Kale's words. Not just fear of the arena, but of what Zane was becoming, the patchwork horror who devoured monsters and wore their traits like stolen jewelry. The migraines came then, sharp and sudden behind Zane's eyes, bringing with them flashes of the psychic whisper from the Colosseum's depths. "We are all experiments. Break the cycle." He pushed the vision away, focusing on the physical world. The cell was small, maybe 10 paces across, with a single energy barrier instead of bars. Beyond it, the corridor stretched into darkness, lit only by the intermittent glow of maintenance panels. Somewhere down there, alien slaves were being mutated in vats of genetic sludge. Zane could almost smell it, the sweet, rotting scent of forced evolution. A sudden hum vibrated through the stone floor. Zane's head snapped up, his chitinous plates clicking together. The energy barrier flickered, then dissolved entirely. "Prisoners to the central chamber," a mechanical voice announced from hidden speakers. Immediately. Kale stood first, slipping the maintenance tool into a hidden fold of his ragged tunic. Zane followed more slowly, his body protesting every movement. The extreme fatigue from his last forced regeneration still lingered in his bones, a deep weariness that no amount of rest seemed to touch. He wondered, not for the first time, how much of himself remained beneath the mutations. How much was still human? They joined a stream of other slaves in the corridor, aliens of a dozen different species, all marked by the Colosseum's cruelty. Some bore cybernetic implants that gleamed under the harsh lights. Others showed signs of biological tampering, extra limbs, crystalline growths, eyes that glowed with unnatural energy. Zane kept his head down, using his minor shape-shifting to subtly alter the texture of his skin, making it blend with the grime-streaked walls. The camouflage wasn't perfect, just enough to avoid drawing attention, but it sent fresh spasms through his shoulders. The central chamber was a vast, circular space with tiers of observation galleries rising into shadow. Holographic projectors hung from the ceiling like metallic spiders, their lenses cold and unblinking. The air here was colder, smelling of disinfectant and something else, something metallic and sharp, like blood and ozone mixed together. Zane and Kale were herded into a group with 24 other slaves. Arena guards stood at regular intervals, their energy rifles humming with contained power. The guards were all of the same species, tall, insectoid creatures with compound eyes and segmented armor. They showed no emotion, only a cold efficiency that was somehow more frightening than rage. At the center of the chamber, a raised platform held 3 figures. Zane recognized them immediately, the arena masters. They wore elaborate robes of deep crimson, their faces hidden behind featureless masks of polished black metal. To their right stood the medic, his 4 arms folded across his white medical robe. The alien's multiple eyes scanned the assembled slaves with clinical detachment. One of the masters stepped forward. His voice emerged from hidden speakers, amplified and distorted until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Slaves of the Starfall Colosseum," the voice began. "You have been tested. You have been forged in combat. Now, you will be granted an opportunity unlike any other." A holographic display flickered to life above the platform. It showed the Colosseum's arena, but transformed, the sand replaced by shifting terrain of crystal and metal, the walls lined with energy projectors and observation decks crowded with alien spectators. The image zoomed in on a single gate at the arena's far end, ornate and gleaming. The Champion's Gate. "The Starfall Grand Tournament begins in 3 cycles, the master continued. 16 combatants. Single elimination. The victor will not only earn the title of champion, but will be granted their freedom." A murmur ran through the slaves. Zane felt it through his telepathic empathy, a surge of desperate hope, quickly crushed by bitter experience. He glanced at Kale, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. "It's a trap," that gesture said. Of course it was. But it was also their only chance. The Champion's Gate led to the control center. The stolen access card in Kale's possession would be useless unless they could reach it. The holographic display shifted, showing a tournament bracket. 16 slots, most already filled with names and images of slaves Zane recognized from previous matches. He scanned the list, his enhanced eyes picking out details even at this distance. There, his own name, listed simply as the Devourer. And Kale's, listed as the Strategist. They were on opposite sides of the bracket. They wouldn't face each other until the finals, if they both made it that far. "The first round matches have been determined," the Master said. "Prepare yourselves. The tournament will test not only your strength, but your adaptability. Your will. Your very essence." The hologram zoomed in on Zane's first opponent. The image showed a creature of shifting darkness, its form barely coherent, a gravity wraith. Data scrolled beside it: species, voidkin. Abilities, mass manipulation, localized gravity fields. Weaknesses, unknown. Zane's mind raced. Gravity control. His chitinous carapace would be useless if the creature could increase his mass until his own bones shattered. His acidic tentacles would be ineffective if they couldn't reach their target. His sonic roar might disrupt the psychic fields of a psionic leech, but against pure physical manipulation of reality, he had nothing. Except his Devourer's evolution. The thought was both tempting and terrifying. Each mutation came with a cost: pain, fatigue, psychological scarring. What would consuming a gravity organ do to him? What new horror would he become? The Masters dismissed them. As the slaves were herded back toward their cells, Zane felt Kale's hand brush against his arm. A quick, deliberate touch. "Later," it said. "We'll plan later." But there was no later for planning. The tournament began the next cycle. Zane stood in the arena's preparation chamber, listening to the roar of the crowd beyond the energy barrier. The sound was different today, not the bloodthirsty cheering of ordinary matches, but something more, anticipatory. The grand tournament was entertainment on a galactic scale, broadcast across star systems. The Empire was watching. He tested his mutations one by one. The chitinous plates along his back and shoulders responded to his mental command, shifting slightly to cover vulnerable spots. His acidic tentacles emerged from his forearms, dripping corrosive fluid that sizzled against the stone floor. He retracted them, then extended his talons. Each movement was practiced, precise. He was a weapon, honed by suffering. The energy barrier dissolved. Zane stepped into the arena. The terrain had been transformed exactly as the hologram had shown. Crystalline formations rose from the ground like jagged teeth, reflecting the arena's harsh lights in prismatic bursts. Metallic plates formed unstable platforms that shifted underfoot. At the far end, the Champion's Gate gleamed, tantalizingly close and impossibly far. His opponent emerged from the opposite gate. The gravity wraith was not what he had expected. It wasn't a creature of darkness, but of distorted light, a humanoid shape that seemed to bend reality around itself. The air around it shimmered like heat haze, and the ground beneath its feet was compressed, the crystal formations flattened into smooth discs. It had no visible eyes, no mouth, only a constantly shifting surface that suggested limbs, a torso, a head. A bell chimed. The match began. Zane moved first, darting behind a crystalline formation. He needed to observe, to understand. The wraith didn't pursue. It simply raised a hand, or something that might have been a hand, and made a grasping motion. The crystal Zane hid behind suddenly weighed 1,000 tons. It didn't move, but its mass increased exponentially, crushing itself into powder under its own weight. Zane threw himself aside as the remains collapsed, shards of crystal slicing through the air. One caught his shoulder, digging deep into his chitinous plating. He felt the impact like a hammer blow. He rolled to his feet, already assessing. Direct assault was impossible. The wraith could increase the mass of anything it focused on, weapons, projectiles, even the air itself. Zane remembered a match months ago, against a creature that could harden its skin. He'd used his acidic tentacles to melt through. But acid was liquid. The wraith could make it so dense it would be like throwing stone. Think. Adapt. He used his sonic roar. The sound erupted from his throat, amplified by mutated vocal cords that had once belonged to a sonic shrieker. The shockwave hit the wraith, and did nothing. The creature's gravity field absorbed the vibrations, dissipating them harmlessly. The wraith responded. It gestured again, and Zane felt his own body grow heavy. Not all at once, but in patches, his right arm first, then his left leg. The effect was localized, precise. His arm dropped to his side, muscles screaming as they tried to lift what felt like a mountain. He stumbled, his weighted leg dragging through the sand. Pain blossomed behind his eyes, the migraines from his telepathic empathy, triggered by stress. Visions flickered at the edges of his consciousness, the breeding pits, the vats, the psychic whisper. Break the cycle. He pushed through. Using his minor shape-shifting, he altered the density of his own tissues where the gravity field was strongest. It was a desperate, instinctive move, making his arm slightly hollow, his leg more fibrous. The effect was minimal, but it bought him a second. He lunged, not at the wraith, but to the side, putting a metallic platform between them. The wraith followed, its movements eerily smooth. It didn't walk so much as glide, the ground compressing ahead of it to form a path. It gestured again, and the platform Zane hid behind twisted, the metal screaming as it was crushed into a ball. Zane was exposed. He had one chance. He remembered the psionic leech. How he devoured its brain to gain telepathic empathy. The cost had been horrific visions, migraines, a scarred mind. But it had given him an advantage. What did the gravity wraith have that he could use? He focused his telepathic empathy on the creature. Not to read thoughts, the wraith likely had none, but to sense its biology. Its structure. And there, at its center, he felt it, a pulsing organ, dense with energy, regulating the gravity fields. The gravity organ. He had to reach it. Had to consume it. The wraith gestured a third time. Zane felt the air around him thicken, becoming like syrup. Then like stone. He couldn't move. Could barely breathe. The pressure built, crushing inward. His chitinous carapace cracked audibly. Fire-resistant skin tore. He tasted blood. With a final, agonizing effort, he used his last mutation. The shape-shifting. Not for camouflage, but for extension. He forced his right arm to elongate, the bones stretching, the muscles tearing and reforming. It was excruciating, a white-hot pain that eclipsed everything else. His hand, now 3 meters away from his body, scrabbled at the wraith's shimmering form. His talons found purchase. They sank into something solid beneath the distortion. He pulled. The wraith staggered, its concentration broken. The gravity field around Zane vanished. He collapsed, gasping, his elongated arm retracting with a wet, tearing sound. Fresh blood soaked his side where the chitin had shattered. He didn't hesitate. He surged forward, ignoring the pain, and slammed into the wraith. His talons dug deeper, searching. There, the gravity organ. A hard, crystalline lump buried in the creature's chest. He ripped it free. The wraith made a sound, not a scream, but a distortion of reality, a warp in the air that hurt Zane's ears. Then it collapsed, its form dissolving into motes of light. Zane held the organ in his hand. It pulsed with a cool, blue energy. He knew what came next. The Devourer's evolution demanded its price. He brought the organ to his mouth and bit down. It tasted like ozone and static, like the void between stars. The energy surged through him, and the pain followed, a deep, bone-deep agony as his body struggled to assimilate this new trait. He felt his cells rewriting themselves, his nervous system adapting to control something that had never been meant for organic life. The cost was immediate. Extreme fatigue washed over him, so profound he nearly blacked out. It was more than tiredness, it was as if his very life force had been drained. He collapsed to his knees, the arena spinning around him. But he could feel it. The new ability. Localized gravity control. He focused on the remains of the wraith, now just a smear of light on the sand. He made a grasping motion with his mind. The remains compressed. Folded in on themselves. Became a dense sphere no larger than his fist. He had won. The crowd's roar was deafening. Zane forced himself to stand, his body trembling with exhaustion. He looked toward the champion's gate, then at the holographic bracket that had appeared above the arena. It showed his next opponent. The image was familiar, a bioengineered horror, all teeth and tentacles and adaptive cells. The same creature whose warning had echoed in the psychic whisper. The same type he had faced in the breeding pits. The match was scheduled for next cycle. Zane turned away, walking slowly toward the exit gate. Each step was an effort. The extreme fatigue from his new mutation weighed on him like a physical burden. But beneath the exhaustion, a cold certainty settled in his mind. The tournament was a trap. The masters were testing him, pushing him to see how far his Devourer's evolution could go. How many horrors he could consume before he became one himself. And he would have to play along. Because at the end of this bloody road lay the Champion's Gate. And beyond it, freedom. Or annihilation. The arena sands were still damp from the previous match, dark patches spreading like bloodstains across the pale mineral surface. Zane stood at the center, his breathing measured despite the fatigue that clung to his bones like lead weights. The localized gravity control mutation had left him with a permanent exhaustion, a weariness that seeped into his marrow, but he forced himself to focus. Across the Colosseum, the Champion's Gate began to rise with a hydraulic hiss that echoed through the silent stands. What emerged was not a creature but a blasphemy. It stood 8 feet tall, a patchwork horror stitched together from multiple alien species. One arm ended in psychic claws that shimmered with violet energy, while the other was a mass of regenerating flesh that pulsed with a sickly green bioluminescence. Its torso displayed exposed ribs that glistened like polished obsidian, and where a face should have been, there were only shifting sensory organs that tracked Zane with predatory precision. The bioengineered horror moved with unnatural grace, each step leaving faint afterimages in the air as its adaptive cells reconfigured themselves to match the environment. The crowd's roar became a distant hum in Zane's ears as the horror charged. He activated his chitinous carapace just as the psychic claws raked through the air, sending waves of disorienting energy that made his telepathic empathy scream in warning. The claws struck his armored shoulder, and though the chitin held, the psychic feedback sent jagged pain through his mind, reactivating the migraines he'd earned from the psionic leech. Zane staggered back, his retractable talons extending from his fingers with a series of sharp clicks. He lunged forward, aiming for the horror's throat, but the creature's regenerating flesh flowed like liquid to intercept the blow. His talons sank into the gelatinous mass, and when he tried to pull back, the flesh clung to him, attempting to absorb his arm into its own biomass. With a grunt of effort, Zane activated his acidic tentacles. The appendages erupted from his back, their tips glowing with corrosive energy as they lashed out at the horror's torso. The acid sizzled against the exposed ribs, eating through the obsidian-like material, but the horror merely shifted its mass, the damaged sections sloughing off as new tissue regenerated in their place. It was adapting faster than he could damage it. Zane's mind raced through his options even as he danced back from another swipe of the psychic claws. The sonic roar might disrupt its senses, but the creature had no conventional hearing organs that he could identify. His shape-shifting camouflage would be useless in direct combat. The gravity control required too much energy in his fatigued state. He needed to find a weakness, a pattern in its adaptations. The horror charged again, and this time Zane didn't retreat. He stood his ground, letting the psychic claws scrape against his carapace as he focused his telepathic empathy on the creature. The sensation was like plunging his mind into freezing oil. There was consciousness there, but it was fractured, a dozen alien minds screaming in unison as they were forced into a single body. The horror wasn't just engineered, it was a prison of souls. Zane's own fractured psyche resonated with that pain, and for a terrifying moment, he felt himself slipping into the collective madness. He shook his head violently, breaking the connection as he unleashed his sonic roar. The sound wave struck the horror's sensory organs, and though it had no ears, the vibration disrupted the delicate psychic fields around its claws. The violet energy flickered and died, leaving the claws as mere physical weapons. Seizing the opening, Zane used his localized gravity control in a focused burst. He didn't try to crush the entire creature, that would drain him completely, but instead increased gravity around its legs by 50%. The horror stumbled, its adaptive cells struggling to compensate for the sudden weight as its feet sank into the arena sands. Zane closed the distance, his talons flashing as he aimed for the pulsing green heart visible through the creature's translucent chest cavity. The horror's regenerating flesh flowed to protect the organ, but Zane's acidic tentacles intercepted, burning through the defensive biomass. His talons pierced the heart, and thick, phosphorescent blood sprayed across his face. The horror screamed, a sound that was part biological agony, part psychic shriek that made the arena's energy shields flicker. It thrashed wildly, its claws raking deep gouges across Zane's chest even through his chitin. Pain exploded through his body, but he held on, his fingers buried in the creature's heart as he felt its life force ebbing away. Then the Devourer's evolution triggered. It wasn't like the previous mutations. This wasn't just excruciating pain or psychological scarring. As Zane tore a piece of the horror's heart free and shoved it into his mouth, he felt consciousnesses flooding into his mind. Dozens of alien memories, fragments of lives, cultures, loves, and terrors, crashed against his psyche like waves against a crumbling cliff. The bioengineered horror had been made from living beings, and now their final moments became his. Zane screamed, falling to his knees as his body convulsed. New tissue knitted across the wounds on his chest, healing faster than the horror's claws could reopen them. Enhanced regeneration, he could feel it working, cells dividing at impossible speeds, but the cost was catastrophic. Each healing pulse came with another memory fragment, a Vex raptor's last hunt, a gelid slime's dissolution in acid, a psionic leech's psychic imprisonment. His sanity frayed at the edges, threads of self unraveling as the horror's consciousness merged with his own. For a moment, he wasn't Zane the Gladiator but the collective agony of engineered specimens, test subjects who had been torn apart and reassembled for someone else's war. The horror was still fighting, its regenerating flesh trying to close around Zane's arm, but his enhanced regeneration outpaced its damage. Where claws tore flesh, new skin formed in seconds. Where psychic energy scrambled his thoughts, the collective memories provided bizarre resistance, alien minds that had endured worse psychic torture. Zane rose, his movements jerky as he fought for control of his own body. He used his gravity control again, this time decreasing gravity around the horror's head. The creature's skull lifted unnaturally, exposing its neck. Zane's talons flashed once, twice, 3 times, severing spinal cord, arteries, and finally the last connections to its shattered mind. The bioengineered horror collapsed, its body dissolving into component biomatter as the engineered bonds failed. Zane stood over it, breathing heavily, his enhanced regeneration already closing the worst of his wounds. But something was wrong. Terribly wrong. His body glitched. For a fraction of a second, his chitinous carapace flowed into the translucent green flesh of the horror. His acidic tentacles became psychic claws that flickered with violet energy. His human face shifted, features melting into the sensory organ cluster he'd just destroyed. Then it snapped back, mostly. His right hand remained partially transformed, fingers elongated into claws that refused to retract. Zane stared at his mutated hand, horror dawning through the fractured remains of his mind. The crowd's cheers sounded like mocking laughter. The arena master's announcement of his victory was a distant buzz. All he could see was the clawed hand, not his, not the horror's, but something new and terrifying. He was losing control. The mutations weren't just tools anymore, they were becoming him. And with each new assimilation, the line between Zane and the monsters he devoured grew thinner, until soon there might be no line at all. Zane's cell was a cage of flesh and metal. He lay on the cold floor, his body a battlefield of conflicting impulses. The chitinous plates along his back twitched, trying to fold inward even as the acidic tentacles coiled around his arms pulsed with corrosive heat. His skin shimmered with the ghost light of his camouflage ability, flickering between human tones and the mottled gray of the cell walls. Every breath came with the taste of ozone, the aftereffect of the electrical surges that now racked his system whenever he moved too quickly. He pressed a hand to his temple, trying to quiet the voices. They weren't voices, not exactly. More like echoes of sensation, the cold hunger of the bioengineered horror, the weightless drift of the gravity wraith, the primal fury of the Vex raptor. Each consciousness he devoured left a stain on his mind, and now they churned together in a silent cacophony. His enhanced regeneration worked at a glacial pace, knitting together the psychic tears in his psyche rather than physical wounds. The cost of that regeneration was etched into the hollows beneath his eyes. The door hissed open without warning. Zane tensed, his talons extending with a series of wet clicks. But it was Kale who slipped inside, his movements quick and silent. The other slave's face was pale beneath the grime of the Colosseum, his eyes darting to the surveillance orb in the ceiling corner. It was dark, deactivated, for now. "They're giving you an hour," Kale whispered, kneeling beside him. "The masters want the crowd hungry for the semi-final." "How bad is it?" Zane's vocal cords vibrated with the ghost of a sonic roar before he forced them into human speech. "The regeneration, it's fighting the other mutations. My body doesn't know what shape to hold." As if to demonstrate, the skin along his forearm rippled, briefly taking on the rubbery texture of the bioengineered horror before snapping back. A jolt of electricity arced from his fingertips to the floor, leaving a black scorch mark. "And that's new." Kale's expression tightened. "The cyborg they've matched you against, it's a Gladiator-class combat model. Energy blades, plasma shielding. The masters bred it for arena spectacle. It'll cut through your chitin like paper. Then I'll have to be faster than paper. Zane pushed himself up, his muscles screaming in protest. The localized gravity control hummed at the edge of his awareness, a heavy ball of potential energy sitting in his gut. The plan. Tell me it's still intact. It is. Kale produced a small, crystalline data chip from a hidden seam in his tunic. The access card I stole, it's key to the champion's gate. But the gate won't open unless you win the tournament. And even then, it only leads to the control center's outer corridor. Where the energy shield generators are. Exactly. The masters keep the Colosseum sealed during matches. If we can disable the shields from the control center during the finals, we can break the lockdown. Get the other slaves out. Kale's eyes flickered with something like hope, quickly buried beneath practicality. But you have to win this next match. The cyborg is the last obstacle before the finals. Zane flexed his hand, watching the talons extend and retract. What's the cyborg's weakness? Its power core. It's mounted in the center of its chest, a crystalline energy matrix. Without it, the blades go dark, the shielding fails. But getting to it. Kale trailed off. The blades can cut through regenerating tissue. Your new ability might not save you if it severs something vital. Then I'll make sure it doesn't get the chance. Zane's mind was already working, sorting through his mutations like tools in a kit. The gravity control to unbalance it. The sonic roar to disrupt its sensors. The camouflage to create an opening. But he could feel the instability in his flesh, each ability fought the others, a biological civil war. If I devour the core. He began. You'll gain its energy manipulation, Kale finished, his voice low. But at what cost? Every time you use that ability, you pay. Your mind is already fracturing. It's that or die here. Zane met his gaze. I didn't survive this long to rot in a cell. The door hissed again, this time with the sharp tone of an override. Kale melted back into the shadows, the data chip disappearing. Two guards entered, their armor clanking. Time, Gladiator. The arena awaits. The Starfall Colosseum was a bowl of screaming light. Zane stepped onto the sand, his feet sinking into the grit. Across the arena, his opponent emerged from the opposite gate. The cyborg gladiator stood 8 feet tall, its body a fusion of polished metal and synthetic muscle. Twin energy blades hummed to life along its forearms, casting a blue-white glare across the sand. A faint shimmer of plasma surrounded it, a defensive field that made the air waver like heat haze. The crowd's roar was a physical force, beating against Zane's enhanced hearing. He forced himself to focus, to push the alien whispers to the back of his mind. His body ached with the need to transform, to become something else, something better suited to survive. He resisted. Control was the only advantage he had. The cyborg moved first. It crossed the distance in a blur, energy blades carving arcs through the air. Zane dropped into a roll, his chitinous carapace deflecting a glancing blow that sent sparks flying. The impact rattled his bones. He came up swinging, acidic tentacles lashing out. They struck the plasma shield and sizzled, eating through the energy barrier but not fast enough. The cyborg's second blade came down, shearing through one of the tentacles. Pain, white-hot and chemical, flared up Zane's arm. The severed tentacle writhed on the sand before dissolving into corrosive sludge. His regeneration kicked in, the stump bubbling with new growth, but it was slow. Too slow. The cyborg pressed the advantage, its blades a whirlwind of death. Zane backpedaled, using his camouflage to blur his outline. The cyborg's sensors tracked him anyway, adjusting with mechanical precision. He tried a sonic roar, the sound waves slamming into the plasma shield and cracking it like glass. But the cyborg didn't falter, it adapted, the shield reforming thicker, brighter. Think. The power core. A faint glow pulsed in the center of its chest, visible through a transparent housing. Zane reached for his gravity control, focusing the weight into a sphere around the cyborg's legs. The sand beneath it compacted, sinking. The cyborg staggered, its balance disrupted for a fraction of a second. That was all Zane needed. He lunged, talons extended. They scraped against metal, finding purchase in a joint. He hauled himself up the cyborg's body, ignoring the searing heat of the plasma shield as it burned his fire-resistant skin. The energy blade swung up, aiming for his torso. Zane twisted, but not enough. One blade bit deep into his side, carving through chitin and flesh. Agony exploded through him, followed by the cold numbness of shock. His regeneration fought against the plasma damage, the flesh knitting and burning in equal measure. He could feel his sanity fraying at the edges, the alien consciousnesses rising in a chorus of panic. No. He clamped down on them, forcing his human mind to the forefront. His fingers found the housing of the power core. It was warm, vibrating with stored energy. The cyborg grabbed him with its free hand, metal fingers closing around his throat. Pressure. Darkness at the edges of his vision. Zane didn't try to break the grip. Instead, he focused everything he had into one last mutation, the shape-shifting. His hand flattened, fingers merging into a single wedge-like tool. He drove it into the housing. Crystal shattered. Raw energy erupted, a torrent of blue lightning that engulfed them both. Zane's world became pain, a pain so vast it swallowed thought. His Devourer's evolution triggered, a ravenous hunger overriding survival instinct. He didn't just eat the core, he consumed the energy itself, drawing it into his body through the contact of his flesh with the broken matrix. The cyborg's blades flickered and died. Its grip went slack. Zane fell to the sand, the cyborg collapsing beside him in a heap of dead metal. But the energy wasn't gone, it was inside him, raging through his veins like a storm. His body convulsed, electrical surges arcing from his skin to the sand, leaving blackened glass in their wake. The cost of this new ability announced itself with every heartbeat, a violent, uncontrollable discharge that made his muscles lock and his teeth rattle. He forced himself to his knees. The crowd was silent, stunned. Then the cheers began, a wave of adulation for the monster they'd created. Zane ignored them. He looked down at his hands, where blue energy crackled between his fingers. Energy absorption. He could feel it, a hollow space inside him where power could be stored, then released. But it came with a price. Every surge felt like being torn apart from the inside. The arena master's voice boomed from the speakers, declaring him the winner. The gates began to open for the medics. But then a different sound cut through the noise, a high-pitched whine, rising from the collars of every slave in the Colosseum. Zane's own collar remained inert, its circuitry fried by his new energy surges. But he saw Kale, standing at the edge of the slave pens, his face contorted in sudden agony. The whine became a shriek, and Kale collapsed, his body convulsing as electricity coursed through the failsafe in his collar. The masters had activated it, a warning, or a punishment. Zane stared, his newfound energy crackling uselessly in his palms, as his only ally writhed on the ground, helpless. The arena floor still smoked from the previous match, the scent of ozone and burnt metal hanging thick in the air. Zane stood at the edge of the combat zone, his body a patchwork of alien adaptations that twitched and pulsed with unstable energy. The electrical surges from his new energy absorption ability crackled beneath his skin like trapped lightning, making his muscles spasm in random intervals. Across the blood-stained sand, the reigning champion emerged from the champion's gate. Forlak was a veteran of 300 matches, his species known as the Kthar, a bipedal creature with obsidian-black skin that absorbed light, giving him the appearance of a living shadow. For arms ended in serrated blades that had been honed to molecular sharpness, and heat vents along his torso glowed with contained plasma. The crowd's roar reached a deafening crescendo, a wall of sound that vibrated through Zane's bones. They chanted Forlak's name, a rhythmic pounding that promised violence. Zane's fractured mind struggled to focus. The alien consciousnesses he'd absorbed whispered in the back of his thoughts, fragments of the bioengineered horror's component species, their memories bleeding into his own. He pushed them down, forcing himself to concentrate on the immediate threat. His enhanced regeneration worked to heal the plasma burns from the cyborg fight, but the new tissue formed in strange patterns, patches of chitin mixing with smooth, fire-resistant skin. Kale was dragged to the observation platform by two guards, his slave collar still smoking from the failsafe activation. The medic, the four-armed alien in white robes, stood nearby, monitoring both combatants with detached interest. Zane caught Kale's eye across the distance. His friend gave a weak nod, his face pale but determined. The plan still stood: win this match, reach the champion's gate, use the stolen access card to disable the energy shields during the award ceremony. Forlak didn't wait for the starting bell. He moved with terrifying speed, closing the distance in 3 bounding strides. Zane's limited telepathic empathy flared, he felt the champion's predatory focus, the cold calculation of a killer who had perfected his craft over decades. The first attack came from the upper left arm, a sweeping slash aimed at Zane's throat. Zane activated his chitinous carapace, the plates hardening just in time to deflect the blade. The impact sent shockwaves through his body, the sound like stone grinding against metal. Forlak's other 3 arms followed in rapid succession, a whirlwind of strikes that forced Zane to retreat. He used his retractable talons to parry what he could, sparks flying where alien metals met biological weapons. Too fast, Zane thought, his mind racing. He's reading my movements. Forlak's heat vents flared, and a wave of superheated air washed over the arena. Zane's fire-resistant skin protected him from the worst of it, but the sudden temperature spike made the air shimmer and distort. The champion used the distraction to land a solid kick to Zane's midsection, sending him skidding backward through the sand. Pain blossomed in Zane's ribs, cracked, maybe broken. His enhanced regeneration began working immediately, but Forlak didn't give him time to recover. The champion advanced, his blade arms moving in precise patterns designed to overwhelm defenses. Zane remembered the gravity control. He focused on the localized field around Forlak, willing the mass to increase. The effect was immediate. Forlak's next step slowed, his movements becoming labored as if moving through thick mud. The champion's obsidian skin seemed to darken further as he fought against the increased gravity. Now, Zane thought. He launched forward, acidic tentacles erupting from his back. They lashed out, aiming for Forlak's joints. The champion twisted, but one tentacle connected with his right shoulder. Acid sizzled against the obsidian skin, eating through the natural armor. Forlak grunted, the first sound he'd made, and severed the tentacle with a swift chop. The pain was excruciating, but Zane didn't stop. He used his sonic roar, the sound waves disrupting Forlak's balance. The champion staggered, his heat vents sputtering. Zane closed in, retractable talons extended for a killing strike. Forlak anticipated it. His lower arms came up in a crossblock, catching Zane's talons while his upper arms stabbed forward. The blades pierced Zane's chitinous carapace, sinking deep into his abdomen. Agony exploded through Zane's nervous system. He could feel the serrated edges tearing through his organs. His enhanced regeneration screamed to life, but Forlak twisted the blades, causing more damage. Blood, dark and thick with alien adaptations, pooled in the sand beneath them. The crowd roared their approval. This was what they'd come to see, the reigning champion proving his dominance, the upstart monster being put in his place. Zane's vision swam. The electrical surges from his energy absorption ability spiked, reacting to his distress. He realized what he needed to do. Forlak's blades were energy enhanced, he could feel the vibration of power running through them. He focused on the energy absorption, willing it to activate. The effect was immediate and violent. Electricity arced from Forlak's blades into Zane's body, but instead of causing damage, Zane's mutation absorbed it, converting the energy into raw power. The champion's weapons dimmed, their cutting edge fading as Zane drained them. Forlak's eyes widened in surprise. He tried to pull back, but Zane grabbed his wrists, holding the blades in place as he continued to drain them. The electrical surges that had been tormenting Zane now became a weapon. He channeled the absorbed energy back through his body and into Forlak. The champion convulsed as electricity coursed through him. His obsidian skin cracked in places, revealing glowing flesh beneath. Zane pushed harder, pouring everything he had into the energy transfer. Forlak's heat vents went dark, then exploded outward in a shower of sparks. With a final effort, Zane ripped the blades from his abdomen and shoved Forlak backward. The champion stumbled, his movements sluggish without his energy-enhanced weapons. Zane didn't give him time to recover. He activated his gravity control again, increasing the mass around Forlak to crushing levels. Forlak dropped to one knee, the sand cracking beneath him from the pressure. Zane approached, his body healing even as he moved, the wounds in his abdomen closing with visible speed thanks to his enhanced regeneration. He stood over the champion, his patchwork form casting a twisted shadow in the arena's artificial light. The crowd had fallen silent. They'd expected Forlak's victory, demanded it, but now they watched as the monster they'd created prepared to claim the crown. Zane reached down, his talons extending. Forlak looked up, his expression unreadable behind his obsidian features. There was no fear there, only cold acceptance. Zane's talons found the neural implant at the base of Forlak's skull, a cybernetic enhancement that gave the champion his tactical precision. With a sharp twist, he ripped it free. The implant glowed with residual energy, wires trailing like severed nerves. Zane didn't hesitate. He brought it to his mouth and devoured it whole, the metal and circuitry grinding between teeth that had been reinforced by multiple mutations. The Devourer's evolution triggered instantly. Fire erupted in Zane's skull. It felt like his brain was being dipped in molten metal, every neuron screaming in agony. The world went white, then black, then white again as his vision failed completely. Temporary blindness descended, leaving him in absolute darkness. But through the pain, something new emerged, a sense of movement before it happened, a ghostly echo of actions not yet taken. Combat precognition. Even blind, Zane could sense Forlak's last desperate lunge. The champion gathered his remaining strength for a final attack, aiming for Zane's heart. Zane didn't need to see it. His new ability showed him the trajectory, the angle, the timing. He sidestepped smoothly, his talons finding Forlak's throat in the same motion. The champion froze, then collapsed. The arena was utterly silent. Zane stood blind in the darkness, his head pounding with the searing headache that was the cost of his new ability. Blood dripped from his talons onto the sand. Slowly, painfully, his vision began to return, first as blurry shapes, then gradually sharpening until he could see the arena around him. The medic stepped forward, examining Forlak's body before turning to the observation platform where the arena masters watched. After a moment, he raised one of his 4 arms. Victory to the challenger. The announcement echoed through the Colosseum. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then the crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in a mixture of awe and terror. They had witnessed something unprecedented, a slave becoming champion, a patchwork monster defeating perfection. Zane was declared champion of the Starfall Grand Tournament. The award ceremony began immediately. Chains were brought, thick, energy-dampening restraints meant to contain the new champion. As they were fastened around his wrists and ankles, Zane felt the instability in his mutations growing. The alien consciousnesses in his mind stirred, agitated by the victory, by the new precognition ability, by the sheer accumulation of too many conflicting traits. The arena masters descended to the combat floor, their expressions unreadable behind ceremonial masks. One of them carried the champion's crown, a circlet of glowing metal that supposedly granted access to the champion's privileges. As he approached, Zane could see the calculation in his eyes. This was still part of their experiment. "Kneel," the arena master commanded. Zane remained standing. Around the Colosseum, slaves watched from their cells and workstations. He could feel their eyes on him, their hope a tangible thing in the air. The arena master's expression hardened. "Kneel, champion." That's when Zane's body began to change. It started with his back, a tearing sensation as new bone structures pushed through skin and chitin. Wings erupted, leathery and vast, their span casting shadows across the arena floor. Spikes grew along his spine, sharp and obsidian black. His arms thickened, muscles rearranging themselves into new configurations. The electrical surges from his energy absorption ability went wild, arcing across his body in visible bolts of lightning. The energy-dampening chains strained, then shattered. Metal links exploded outward, pelting the arena masters and forcing them to retreat. Zane roared, a sound that was part sonic ability, part pure rage, and the very air vibrated with the force of it. On the observation platform, Kale saw his moment. He activated the stolen access card, the device glowing in his hand. Across the Colosseum, energy shields flickered and died. Slave collars deactivated, falling to the ground with metallic clinks. The riot began instantly. Slaves poured from their cells, armed with whatever they could find, tools, broken weapons, their own hands. Guards tried to contain them, but the suddenness of the rebellion caught them unprepared. Zane stood at the center of it all, a monstrous figure with wings spread wide, spikes gleaming in the artificial light, his body still shifting and changing as his mutations spiraled out of control. The arena masters shouted orders, calling for reinforcements. The medic backed away, his 4 arms raised in a defensive posture. The crowd panicked, scrambling for exits as the violence spilled into the stands. Zane's vision swam with precognitive flashes, he saw guards approaching from the left, energy weapons charging. He saw Kale fighting his way toward the control center. He saw the champion's gate, still open, leading to freedom. But most of all, he saw the Empire's fleet arriving in orbit, their ships blotting out the stars. The final cost of his victory was just beginning. The Colosseum erupted into chaos. Zane's body, still rippling with uncontrolled mutation, surged forward as the chains shattered around him. His new wings, jagged, chitinous things that sprouted from his back, flared with a painful crackle of energy absorption, casting eerie shadows across the blood-stained sand. The air smelled of ozone and fear. Slaves poured from their cells, a tide of desperation breaking against the stunned guards. Kale was already moving, his face pale from the collar's earlier shock but his eyes sharp with purpose. He shouted orders, his voice cutting through the din, to the control center. Follow the main corridor. Zane's mind was a fractured landscape. Alien consciousnesses whispered at the edges of his thoughts, memories of the bioengineered horrors component beings, their psychic claws still scraping at his sanity. He pushed them down, focusing on the immediate threat. Guards in polished armor formed a line ahead, energy rifles humming to life. Their faces were hidden behind helmets, but their hesitation was palpable. They had seen him defeat Forlac, they knew what he could do. He didn't give them time to think. A sonic roar tore from his throat, a wave of concussive force that rippled through the air. The guards staggered, their rifles clattering to the ground as their earpieces shorted out in bursts of static. Zane charged, his retractable talons extending with a metallic snick. He moved with a predator's grace, enhanced by combat precognition, a faint, headache-inducing shimmer of possible futures that let him dodge the first wild shots. His chitinous carapace deflected a glancing blast, the impact sending a dull ache through his ribs. Kale fought beside him, wielding a scavenged stun baton with practiced efficiency. He wasn't as fast or as strong as Zane, but he was clever, using the chaos to trip guards and rally other slaves. The drones will come next, he yelled over the noise. They'll try to contain us. As if on cue, a swarm of combat drones descended from the Colosseum's high ceilings. They were sleek, metallic spheres with rotating weapon mounts, their red targeting lasers painting the rebels. Zane's telepathic empathy flared, a useless gift in this moment, but it let him feel the slave's panic as a physical weight. He couldn't afford to hesitate. He activated his localized gravity control, focusing on a cluster of drones. The air around them thickened, their movements slowing to a crawl. It was a strain, like holding a boulder aloft with his mind, but it bought seconds. Zane's acidic tentacles lashed out, their tips glowing with corrosive fluid. They struck the immobilized drones, melting through armor with a hiss of dissolving metal. One drone exploded in a shower of sparks, its core exposed. Zane didn't think, he acted on instinct. He ripped the core free, a fist-sized crystal pulsing with blue energy, and devoured it. The Devourer's evolution triggered instantly. No new mutation came, but energy flooded his veins, recharging his depleted reserves. The electrical surges from his earlier assimilation of the cyborg's power core flared in response, arcs of lightning dancing across his skin. His body grew more monstrous, patches of fire-resistant skin darkened to a charcoal black, his wings elongated with bony spurs, and his eyes glowed with an unnatural, predatory light. He could feel the alien consciousnesses within him stir, hungering for more. Zane, keep moving. Kale's voice was urgent. He pointed down a wide corridor lined with flickering holographic displays, the path to the control center. Elite guards were already forming a barricade there, their armor thicker, their weapons more advanced. These weren't the panicked grunts from the arena floor, these were professionals, cold and methodical. Zane led the charge, his mutations a patchwork arsenal. He used his sonic roar again, this time to shatter the reinforced glass of observation windows, raining shards down on the guards. His acidic tentacles melted through a security door, the metal bubbling and dripping like wax. With each use, his body protested. The enhanced regeneration from the bioengineered horror's heart worked overtime, knitting together minor wounds, but it couldn't heal the psychological fractures. Visions flashed behind his eyes, the psychic alien's nightmares, the cyborg's cold logic, the horror's merged agony. He gritted his teeth, pushing through. The control center loomed ahead, a massive chamber sealed behind a blast door. Inside, Zane could see the arena masters through the transparent alloy, their faces twisted in rage and fear. The medic was there too, his forearms gesturing frantically as he argued with them. Zane didn't care about their debates. He focused on the door. Elite guards met them in a final stand. Energy blades clashed against Zane's talons, their heat singing his fire-resistant skin. He used his energy absorption, draining a guard's plasma rifle until it sputtered and died, but the effort sent fresh electrical surges through his limbs, making them tremble. Kale fought at his side, taking down a guard with a well-placed strike to the knee. Other slaves joined the fray, their numbers overwhelming the elite's discipline. With a final heave, Zane tore the blast door from its hinges. The control center was a cacophony of alarms and shouting technicians. The arena masters backed away, but the medic stood his ground, his white robe stained with something dark. "You're tearing yourself apart," the medic hissed, his voice a synthetic buzz. "Every mutation is another fracture." Zane ignored him. His eyes locked on the main console, a complex array of screens and levers that controlled the Colosseum's energy shields. He could see the readouts, shields at 87% integrity, holding back the chaos outside. Kale rushed to a secondary terminal, slamming the stolen access card into a slot. "I'm initiating the override," he shouted. But the arena masters weren't done. One of them, a tall alien with iridescent scales, activated a hidden protocol. The console sparked, its systems locking down. "You think we didn't plan for this?" the master snarled. "The shields are hardwired to the Empire's network. You can't break them without." Zane didn't let him finish. Rage, fear, and the alien whispers in his mind coalesced into a single, brutal impulse. He raised a taloned fist, channeling every ounce of his patchwork power, gravity control to amplify the force, energy absorption to fuel it, combat precognition to find the weakest point. With a roar that was part sonic blast, part primal scream, he brought his fist down on the console. The impact was deafening. Metal crumpled, screens shattered, and sparks erupted in a fountain of light. The energy shields flickered, their blue haze wavering like a dying flame. For a moment, the Colosseum seemed to hold its breath. Then the shields failed entirely, dissolving into nothingness. A wave of triumph surged through the rebels. Slaves cheered, their cries echoing in the sudden silence. Zane stood panting over the wreckage, his body aching with the cost of his actions. His wings drooped, heavy with exhaustion. Kale clapped him on the shoulder, a grim smile on his face. "We did it. The way out is open." But as Zane looked up through the shattered observation dome, his combat precognition triggered a warning, a searing headache that made him stagger. The sky above the Colosseum, once a static tapestry of stars, began to warp. Space itself twisted, reality tearing open in violent ripples of light. One by one, massive ships emerged from hyperspace, their silhouettes blotting out the stars. They were sleek, predatory vessels marked with the Empire's sigil, a galaxy encircled by chains. Their weapons glowed with charged energy, targeting the Colosseum below. The Imperial fleet had arrived. The sky above the Starfall Colosseum fractured into 1,000 shards of light as the Imperial fleet materialized from warp. Zane felt the air grow heavy, thick with the ozone scent of energy weapons charging. His patchwork body, a tapestry of chitin, tentacles, and scar tissue, tensed instinctively, the combat precognition he'd stolen from Forlac screaming warnings through the searing headache that never fully faded. "Incoming." Kale's voice cut through the chaos of the slave revolt, his words tight with pain from the collar's recent electrocution. Zane's limited telepathy caught the edge of Kale's fear, a sharp metallic taste in his mind. The first bombardment struck before Zane could respond. Plasma bolts rained down like falling stars, slamming into the Colosseum's upper tiers. Stone and metal screamed as they vaporized, sending shrapnel raining into the central arena where slaves still scrambled for the exits. A chunk of debris the size of a human torso hurtled toward a group of fleeing aliens, a four-armed species Zane didn't recognize, their eyes wide with terror. Zane moved without thinking. His body responded with the brutal efficiency of countless fights, the mutations working in concert even as they warred within him. He activated the localized gravity control he'd taken from the graviton beast, the ability that made his bones ache with phantom weight. The air around the debris thickened, slowing its descent just enough for Zane to intercept it. He raised his chitinous carapace, the first mutation, the one that started it all, and took the impact on his shoulder. The carapace cracked with a sound like breaking pottery, but held. Pain radiated through him, familiar and bitter. "Get to the lower tunnels." Zane roared, his voice augmented by the sonic ability stolen from the Shrieker. The sound wave knocked several smaller pieces of debris off course, creating a momentary clearing. He could feel the electrical surges from his energy absorption ability dancing along his skin, tiny arcs of blue lightning that made his muscles twitch unpredictably. The cost of devouring the cyborg's power core, a permanent storm in his flesh. Kale was already at the control console, his hands flying over the alien interface. "The shields are partially down, but the fleet's jamming the override. They're trying to trap us here." Sweat beaded on Kale's forehead, mixing with blood from a cut on his temple. Zane's telepathic empathy caught the frantic calculations in Kale's mind, circuit diagrams, frequency patterns, the desperate hope that they hadn't come this far only to die in the rubble. Another volley struck. This time, the plasma bolts were aimed lower, targeting the slave masses directly. Zane saw the trajectories through his precognition, dozens of death paths intersecting with living bodies. He couldn't stop them all. Couldn't be everywhere. The realization tasted like ash in his mouth. He chose a cluster of slaves near the eastern gate, where the crowd was thickest. Activating his gravity control again, he focused on the space above them, creating a dome of intensified gravity that made the air shimmer like heat haze. The plasma bolts struck the invisible barrier and detonated prematurely, their energy dissipating in cascading fireworks. But maintaining the field required concentration Zane could barely spare. The headache from his precognition ability sharpened to a knife point behind his eyes, and for a moment, the world went gray at the edges, the temporary blindness returning in warning flashes. Zane! The console's overloading. Kale shouted. I need more power to break through their jamming. Power. Zane looked at the energy weapons still firing from the fleet. Looked at the electrical surges dancing across his own body. An idea formed, terrible and perfect. Draw their fire to me. Zane bellowed, his voice carrying over the din of collapsing architecture. He stood in the center of the arena, a monstrous silhouette against the hellish sky. His acidic tentacles emerged from his back, their tips dripping corrosive fluid that sizzled where it hit the stone. His retractable talons extended from his hands, gleaming in the artificial light. He was everything the arena masters had made him, a patchwork horror, a living weapon. The fleet obliged. A concentrated barrage of energy bolts converged on his position. Zane didn't dodge. He spread his arms wide and activated his energy absorption ability to its fullest extent. The world dissolved into blue-white agony. Electricity tore through him, a river of lightning that should have vaporized his flesh. But the mutation held. The energy absorption ability, stolen from a cyborg's dying core, drank the attack greedily. Zane felt his cells screaming as they converted the violent energy, storing it, redirecting it. The electrical surges that normally plagued him became a controlled storm, channeled through his body and into the ground at his feet. Stone cracked and melted where he stood. Now, Kale. Zane gritted out through teeth clenched so tight he thought they might shatter. Kale slammed his hands on the console. The stolen access card glowed with stolen authority. The energy Zane had absorbed flowed through some connection Zane didn't understand, through the Colosseum systems, through Kale's desperate will, and into the override sequence. The remaining shields fell with a sound like breaking glass. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the slaves surged toward freedom, a river of broken bodies flowing through the gates Zane and Kale had fought to open. But the fleet wasn't finished. A capital ship, a massive wedge of dark metal, angled its main cannon toward the fleeing masses. Zane's precognition showed him the outcome, a beam of pure energy that would vaporize hundreds, maybe thousands. There was no time to absorb that much power. No way to stop it. His body decided for him. The mutations, already strained to their limits, erupted in one final, violent transformation. Zane felt his back tear open, bones breaking and reforming with sounds that echoed in his skull. Agony beyond anything he'd experienced, worse than the first devouring, worse than the psychic invasion, ripped through him. He screamed, and the sound was part human, part something else entirely. From the ruin of his back, wings erupted. Not the delicate wings of birds, but massive, leathery things veined with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed with stolen energy. They stretched 20 feet on either side, membranes taut over a framework of bone that had once been his ribs and spine. The cost was immediate and permanent. Zane felt his skeletal structure alter, locking into this new configuration. He would never stand fully upright again. The wings were part of him now, another scar in a body made of scars. He didn't hesitate. Didn't have time to mourn what he'd lost. The capital ship's cannon glowed with building energy. Zane launched himself into the air. The wings beat once, twice, stirring up dust and debris in a whirlwind. He wasn't graceful, the flight was desperate, ungainly, the movements of a creature that had never been meant to fly. But it was enough. He swept low over the fleeing slaves, his talons extended. He grabbed those he could reach, a pair of insectoid aliens, a mammalian creature with 3 eyes, Kale who reached up without hesitation. Others clung to his legs, his tentacles, any part of him they could grasp. The cannon fired. The beam of energy struck the Colosseum where Zane had stood moments before. The ancient structure, the prison, the testing ground, the hell that had forged him, imploded. Stone turned to dust. Metal vaporized. The shockwave hit Zane like a physical blow, nearly knocking him from the air. He beat his wings harder, muscles screaming in protest. He looked back only once. The Starfall Colosseum was gone, replaced by a crater of molten rock. The Empire's fleet hung in the sky like vultures, their weapons tracking his flight. He could feel their targeting systems locking onto his biosignature, could sense through his precognition the orders being given: pursuit, capture, dissection. He was free. But as he flew toward the horizon with his ragged band of survivors clinging to his monstrous form, Zane knew the truth with cold certainty. The Empire would never stop hunting him. He had become the very thing they feared most, a monster they couldn't control, a weapon that had turned against its makers. And somewhere in the galaxy, other Colosseums waited. Other testing grounds. Other horrors. The wings beat on, carrying him away from the ruins of one prison, and toward whatever came next.